Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Asia-Pacific Business Forum towards an Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business. It is our pleasure to host so many participants here at the ESCAP Conference Centre, and also we have even more people joining online. We have a very busy program for the day, and I'm sure you will all find it enlightening. My name is Ben McCarthy. I'm an Associate Economic Affairs Officer with the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division here at ESCAP, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for this event. Please can I remind everyone in the hall to keep their masks on when they are seated in the audience. Our speakers from the stage may remove their masks when speaking. I would now like to invite Dr. George Lamb, the Chair of the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, to deliver the welcome statement.
Good afternoon, Executive Secretary. We have the Ministry of Finance and the Deputy Governor of Bangkok, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to this year's edition of the Asia-Pacific Business Forum, the APBF 2022. As some of you may know, this is the business platform of ESBN, which is the UN ESCAP Sustainable Business Network. The ESBN is the private sector platform of the UN ESCAP, and this is where businesses, corporate leaders, SMEs are united, mobilized to support the sustainability agenda and the SDGs advancing. The APBF has been organized for up until this year is the 15th time, if I'm correct. So it's very good that after 1 year of disruption because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are back in hybrid form. So thank you for making time to travel all the way to Bangkok, beautiful city. We have the Deputy Governor of Bangkok here, so I have to, on behalf of all the visitors, I propose a big hands for Bangkok. And we have been talking about doing a new Green Deal for business, Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business, calling for more efforts, smarter and greener solutions from the business sector to help. So this year's APBF is focused on launching this Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business across 5 pillars. So these are the green energy pillar, the green infrastructure and logistics pillar, the green finance pillar. I'm so glad that the Minister of Finance is also here. So talking about green finance without His Excellency's help is a bit academics. Let's also give a big hand to Minister of Finance of Thailand. And then the digital innovation pillar, the sustainable consumption and production, green supply chains pillar. So these are the 5 pillars that we will focus our energy on, and will mobilize all the verticals, all the industries to work together. So this year's major theme is towards an Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business. This is exciting because we will have 3 round tables packed in this afternoon. So one is on aligning business with green transformation. Another one is talking about priority actions for business. So we need to take actions, specific actions. The 3rd roundtable is about ESG for SMEs. So when talking about ESG, we tend to talk about the financial institutions, the big investment funds and so on, but it means a lot for SMEs. In fact, ESG should be for SMEs, which account for the bulk of our economy. So without taking up too much valuable time, I'd like to close this welcome remarks by wishing all of you a very safe and pleasant time in Bangkok for those visiting Bangkok. And for those participants from Bangkok, from Thailand, I wish you success, happiness, and health going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lam. I now have the pleasure to call upon Dr. Amida Salsia Alistrabana, Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to deliver her opening remarks.
Excellency Mr. Arkom Terpintayapaisit, Minister of Finance of Thailand, Excellency Dr. Tafida Kamovich, Deputy Governor of Bangkok, George Lam, Chair of ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all participants in the Asia-Pacific Business Forum 2022. The theme of today's forum is towards an Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business, which will later be launched. We are meeting at a time when the region is faced with multiple crises. Countries are gradually recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and its devastating impact, while also dealing with the effects of the ongoing long-term climate change and natural disasters. Many of our societies and economies are entering a new phase of living with the pandemic and the new normal. As countries emerge from the pandemic, inflationary pressures and the surge of prices, especially agricultural commodities and energy, are challenging recovery efforts, particularly in developing countries where high food and energy prices could push many further fall into poverty. While the region was not on track to achieve SDGs prior to the pandemic, progress made across some SDGs has stalled, and there is an urgent need to redouble our efforts to regain the momentum to achieve SDGs. The crisis has shown that the region needs to invest in its health infrastructure, address the digital divide, and improve trade, transport, and energy connectivity. Here, it is very important to recognize that the private sector has an important role to play in addressing these global challenges by advancing SDGs, as well as taking climate action. Indeed, attaining SDGs will require coordinated efforts by the whole society and whole government. Recognizing the role that private sector can play in scaling up climate action, ESBN, or ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, adopted the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business Declaration. The Green Deal for Business encourages companies to go greener, to work to decarbonize both their own operation as well as those of their supply chain, mitigate other negative environmental impact, and act responsibly towards workers and communities. I stand with ESBN and its members in this endeavor and encourage businesses in the region to support the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business. Allow me to highlight 3 key areas which you may wish to consider during today's further discussion. First, there is an urgent need to advance zero carbon, affordable and resilient energy systems by scaling up renewables in the energy mix and increasing energy efficiency while ensuring affordable energy access for all. Second, we need to address the digital divide. Large sections of the region's population do not have access to high-speed and affordable internet, and the situation may have worsened due to COVID-19 pandemic. There is an urgent need to scale up investment in next-generation network and technologies to address this digital divide. Third, improving support for MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which account for more than maybe the bulk of domestic enterprises in Asia-Pacific, more than 90%. They are the backbone of the private sector, representing a wide range of businesses that can contribute to SDGs. However, they face several challenges, including a lack of access to finance and markets, which the pandemic has further aggravated. Later today, speakers from selected MSMEs in the region will discuss their experiences in integrating sustainability in their operations and how improving environmental, social, and governance, or ESG performance, has helped unlock market opportunities. Going forward, I'm pleased to inform you that ESBN is working on a rollout plan for the Green Deal for Business and is open to involving new members to further enrich this active and dynamic community of business leaders and participants. In closing, I count on your commitment and support to roll out the Green Deal for Business across the Asia-Pacific region as we work together to build a sustainable and resilient Asia and the Pacific. I stand with ESBN and its members to ensure that we collectively get this done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary, for outlining the challenges our region faces following the pandemic. I would now like to call upon His Excellency, Mr. Akom Termpitaya Paisit, Minister of Finance for the Royal Government of Thailand, to deliver his inaugural address.
Kun Amida Saucia Alicia Bana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Deputy Governor of Bangkok, Dr. George Lam, Chair ESCAP Sustainable Business Network and President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to you all, both in this room and online. First of all, I would like to thank the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific for inviting me to be here at this auspicious event. It is my great pleasure to deliver the inaugural address at the Asia Pacific Business Forum 2022. The COVID pandemic has had a negative impact on the Thai economy. During the past 2 years, Thailand has seen one of the worst economic downturns in decades, with Thailand's GDP contracting by 6.2% in 2020. The government issued a 1.5 trillion Thai baht emergency decree to relieve the impact on affected individuals, as well as measures to promote domestic spending. Apart from that, SME and business also been assisted by the soft loan program by the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance. This year, we expect that the economy recovery will continue, even with the added uncertainties from rising commodity prices and inflation. The year-end GDP growth is expected to be around 3 to 3.5%, supported by the improved situation of the COVID-19 and increase in tourism sector and domestic consumption. As we can see from February, all the traveling restriction in Thailand has been lifted, making more comfortable and convenient for foreign visitors to visit Thailand. And I'm sure that some of you may have their traveling from your country to Thailand, and you will see how lively Bangkok is today, because we can see lots of foreigners and walking around and going to several attraction sites. For the policy direction after the COVID, as we gradually recover from the impact of pandemic, we have been taking this opportunity to reassess our growth model and priorities. The government is implementing strategies to transform the Thai economy towards the high value-added economy, one that is more balanced, inclusive, and greener. Economic growth that leaves people behind and impedes on the global efforts in addressing climate change must not be the way forward. That is why we are focusing on the following key strategies. I just want to pinpoint the three major areas. First, the promotion of the bio-circular green economy model, or BCG model. The government has introduced the BCG model as the guiding policy, which has become a part of the national agenda. We are committed to work towards the target of zero carbon emissions by the year 2065. Actually, before 2065, we have our target. By 2030, 20% of the ICE vehicle will be replaced by the electric vehicle, 20% by 2030. The fourth strategy under the BCG includes food and agriculture, medical and wellness, biochemical and bioplastic, and tourism and creative economy. Of course, one of the flagship policy of the government is the Eastern Economic Corridor development, which will be our new growth engine for the Thai economy in the next few years. Certainly, the EEC will be different from the past, that we have been promoting and developing the Eastern Seaboard area. 40 years ago, the development in the Eastern Seaboard will be mainly for the import substitution by introducing the heavy industry, automobile industry, and now we're becoming the auto hubs in Asia or in Southeast Asia as well. But now, EEC or Eastern Seaboard has to change to higher value-added and technology industry, as well as the less emission of the carbon CO2. For green policies, the cabinet has approved for example, electric vehicle promotion package that embrace both tax and non-tax measures to incentivize the use of the EVs as well as EV investment. So the tax measure has already been implemented by reducing the import duties as well as the reduction of the excise tax for automobile for those who are coming to invest in Thailand in the EV factories. We never forget to talk about the sustainable finance. Normally, sustainable finance or financing usually be the last topic because you talk about the investment, you talk about the consumption, but where the money come from, then you ask for the government, you ask for the CEO or the owner of the company, please give me the money. But now we have to change. The financing will be the topic number one. Where we have the resources, then we will indicate in what area that we will support. Otherwise, we don't have any. We don't have any clear policy on how we finance, how we allocate our resources. And now it's clear the global agenda as well as regional agenda and the country agenda is on almost everything going to the green policy. So on sustainable finance, the Ministry of Finance has successfully launched the Kingdom of Thailand's first sustainability bond in August 2020 to support green and social sectors, in line with the United Nations Sustainability Goals, UN SDGs. The bond has now reached almost 212 billion baht in July 2022, with proceeds going to green transportation and COVID relief program. Actually, we are working with International Bank on the second tranche of the sustainability bond, or whatever we call the green bond or blue bond. That's why I'm saying that the financing should be first thing to talk about where the money come from, and we have the money, we have the enough physical space for the government to use for any policies on the green. Okay. But however, when we're talking about sustainable finance, more or less we're talking on the public sector, on the government sector. In this room or in the virtual participant, most of the participants are from private sector. I think the private sector is moving on the green policies more quicker than the government sector. Government sector will deal with most of the mega projects, particularly on the transportation, which in the future we will see the more green infrastructure, green transportation, as well as the green energy, as well as the green industry, and also businesses. So I think in this room we have I'm not sure from any stock exchange of Thailand, but for sure, Secretary General of the Stock Exchange Commission is here with us. The guiding policy for the Stock Exchange, the Commission is also on the green policy. So Stock Exchange Commission is working with the Minister of Finance on how to formulate the policy and how to decide the package for the government as well as for the private sector. We could see lots of the listed companies in the stock exchange. They are moving even faster. Just yesterday, I just learned that there is one company who are collecting the used clothes and make a recycling and becoming the new fabric with the colorful and quality new clothes. That is why I'm saying that the private sector is moving faster. So we have to work together among us in this room as well as working with the government, because some of the areas that may need the government support, not only the tax incentive, but also the non-tax incentive as well. The second area is on the inclusive aging society scheme. Why the aging society is related to the green policy that we are talking, or Green Deal. Why? Because the people who are over 60 years old or the elderly, they all need the fresh air. They need to breathe the fresh air, not only us, but the older people as well. They need good food. They also need the fresh air. They need the good transportation. The elderly may be handicapped, maybe in the like ordinary people, they are complete, a perfect body, but only aging. So everything must be considered in the future, that preparing the country for the aging population. And Thailand is no exception. We are already entering the aging society already, and we become more serious in the next 10 or 20 years. So as we are moving towards the aging society, we need to ensure that our policies encourage the integration of all ages in society, in particular the financial well-being of the elderly. The government has introduced various programs that would induce savings and investment for retirement, such as National Saving Fund, government pension fund, private provident funds, and social security funds. Don't forget the older, the saver. So the money collect from the people who are saving until their retirement, that's a source of fund for the investment. In addition, to promote financial inclusion as well as savings, government has made saving bonds more accessible to all age groups. Saving bonds has always been an important tool to stimulate savings among Thai people. These initiatives are expected to ease the future burden of aging-related expenditure from the budget. Moreover, the government is now aiming to enhance and sustain its public hospital and universal health coverage policy by upgrading regional hospitals to not only provide better health care services, but also to ensure that health care can be accessed by all citizens, in particular the lower income individuals and the elderly. The third point is about the digital economy and transformation. We have been adapting to the disruption of digital financial services to improve people's access to government services, facilitate cross-border trade and transfer through digital payments, and improve SME access to financing, such as promoting G2C from government to citizens, e-government procurement, e-filing for tax payment, and digital government savings bond through e-wallet. This is quite successful for the past 2 years that the government assistance through the cash handouts program and the co-payment program to help the people during the past 2 years who lost their incomes and revenues to be able to spend daily for daily expenditure. So the government pay half, and all was done through the e-wallet. Moreover, the Ministry of Finance also stimulates the economy, as I said, through smartphone applications in variety of measures to ensure that all Thais are ready for digital transformation, such as, just to mention again, Eat, Buy, Spend scheme, half co-payment program, and the state welfare card scheme. On the international front, we are in the world's first cross-border remittance linkage between Thailand's PromptPay and Singapore's PayNow. This digital transformation can significantly reduce internal and external costs and also promote green innovation such as smart city development in 3 provinces of the flagship Eastern Economic Corridor, or EEC, as I mentioned. The project involved the integration of artificial intelligence, digital technology, green information, and communications technology system into the industrial and cities. Why digital economy is important for the green policy? I can say, for example, the transaction done between the government, tax administration, and the people. During the past 2 years, people don't have to go to the office, the tax office. They just pay tax on the smartphone. So you can save the energy. You can save the traveling time from your home to the office. Or the company, they can save the lots of paperwork by submitting on the online. So that's how we integrate the digital technology into the government business and also the private business as well. This morning, I presided over one of the seminar, Asian Transportation Association seminar. The governor of Bangkok kindly be the speaker in the seminar and talking about digitalization in the transport in Bangkok. That's very timely topic, and we hope that we will be seeing the Bangkok more lively and livable cities and convenient. As Dr. George Lam just mentioned before at the start of the meeting, that how fascinating the Bangkok is. Not only traveling, but also foods. You can enjoy food now after 2 years, no traveling, no people see Bangkok. And of course, Thai people also want to see your country too. So reopening of the economy will facilitate the smooth transition from pandemic to the economic recovery. Just want to mention a little bit on the APEC. This year, Thailand hosting the APEC summit in November. But part of the APEC summit, there will be the finance minister meeting during 19 to 21st of October. There are only 2 topics to be discussed. One is the sustainable finance, and certainly we'll cover not only the private sector, but also the public sector as well. Secondly, on the digitalization of the digital economy. That's only 2 topics. But of course, there will be more detail on these 2 particular topics. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, we have a lot of work to do if we are to create a more sustainable and green economy for the future generations. Along the way, new threats and risks will continue to emerge, making our task even more difficult. For Thailand, we are committed to our part by working towards our transformation goals. At the same time, we stand ready to further strengthen the cooperation between all parties to contribute in any way we can to the international community's efforts in making the world more inclusive and sustainable. And lastly, I hope all participants will make use of time to discuss about how the business can be part of the Green Deal and how to work collaboratively between business, government, and the people. And lastly, thank for the United Nations ESCAP to organize this meeting, and thanks for Dr. George Lam as chair of the ESBN to hold this conference today. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellency, thank you for those insights into both public and private efforts being made to push the balanced development of the Thai economy. I would like to now call upon Her Excellency Dr. Tawida Kamalway, the Deputy Governor of Bangkok, to deliver her special address.
Sawadee. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Dr. George Lam, Chair of ESBN, Under Secretary General of the UN and Executive Secretary of the ESCAP, His Excellency Minister of Finance. It is also my honor to standing here on behalf of my governor and on behalf of the Bangkokian to welcome everyone to Bangkok. If the governor was here, he would actually say, quote unquote, "Thank you very much for the kind word from the chair of ESBN." That thing that Bangkok is really a fabulous and marvelous city. But he will also say that we've been ranked as one of the top city to visit, not to live in. That's really hard words. And that's because you can already see, if you don't want to actually be too sweet to us, for a couple of days that you are in Bangkok, you already see something. And you already see that the complex of the problem that we confront. And you can also see that we have a lot of gaps of trying to translate and implement to the SDGs. It's not very easy to the city of Bangkok. So I'm standing in front of you today. ESCAP has really honored me to address a spatial address. I'm not sure how much of the spatial address I can do, but I do my best. Let me quote the saying of the chair of ESBN. I really like when he said, we are trying to go smarter and greener. Let me execute greener first, because smarter is really difficult and complicated for Bangkok. Going greener, as also my Excellency Minister of Finance also addressed, we have a lot of implementation toward Bangkok in terms of trying to be greener in a lot of dimensions. However, when we stepped in about 3 months ago, the governor himself also has his focus on his policy 216 goals, which I'm not sure that I can accomplish 216 goals today in my address. However, let me do this. In terms of doing greener, according to his policy, of course, good environment is also considered greener. You might already know, and he always addressed this. I think my excellent Minister of Finance might already been heard this morning that Bangkok is trying to actually achieve 1 million trees in 4 years, according to our terms. However, at this moment, the actual trees that we already grow is reaching up to 40,000. And also another, however, private sector, civil societies, and all of the stakeholders that actually be kind to us had committed. We already get about 1,200,000 trees committed by those sectors, that they are going to align with our goals of trying to have a lot of trees and definitely make Bangkok greener. So please come back in another 2 years. It will be really greener, I hope. So to that greener by your eyes, that's easy. Also, when we talk greener, Bangkok also have a lot of policy toward greener. And that greener is not directly just growing trees. That's not what we're aiming for. But also changing what I would call green behavior, if that word is actually exists, or I'm actually creating a new one. The green behavior that we are trying to see in our policy, it's doing in several dimensions. One of the difficult things is changing the norms of the urban city like Bangkok. We are very modern in some ways. If you can walk along the street, you can see a lot of contemporary thing and the mixed between the old and the new. And that's what created a complexity of how to change the behavior and the norms of living, to make people care about waste management, to make people care about space management, to make people care about even the neighbors that we live by, and trying to help one another. To actually do that, to ease it up, the life of a lot of people in Bangkok. Bangkok have a lot of vulnerabilities, besides the beauty thing that you actually already visit for the past couple of days that you're here. However, those vulnerable dimensions, including some of the communities and some of the diversity of the people around Bangkok as well. So to change the norms of the living, to have them care about something else that is not very social and economic kind of status that they have, it's not easy. So basically to change to the green behavior, it required not only trying to change, trying to say that the norms of SDG, the norms of climate change, the norms of everything has been into their life. I think that's too difficult. We need to also create incentive and support on the behalf of Bangkok government or on behalf of the Bangkok management. And that means whatever the BMA can do and can support the people. We have a lot of projects throwing out. It might seem very small, but to the policy that we have, we believe that small dots, actually a lot of small dots, would actually create more power and a big, huge one that cannot cover everywhere in Bangkok. So when we try to do that, we started out from a small thing. We actually have appointment with every household, trying to get that trash out of their house, and we will help them carry out of their home on the day that they actually have free time to do so, not the day that have to work. We also help them in terms of cleaning those drainage system within the household. We can also help them trying to create what we call food bank. We are trying to help them, what we call that. We are trying to do organic waste. We're trying to help them do food waste. We are trying to basically creating a cycle of their easy life. That's the policy that we actually going toward greener. both in terms of having the environment green, as we see, and as well as we're trying to change the word, it might be difficult. We're trying to change the culture of the urban city that we live in. We are too busy every day. So in order to do that, Bangkok needs to support and actually provide. That's to the greener side. However, on the smarter side, that's really a huge question, a question mark everywhere. The governor has his very famous saying, another one, quote, he said, "It's really the time that we have to make smart city, but the city cannot outsmart people." From what this saying means, if we care, a lot of the policy that BMA has been thrown out for the past decades has been the policy that actually trying to aim at the huge structure, as well as trying to create what we would call gray structure more than green and the blue. So basically by saying so, small people in each of the households are not very well taken care of. And in order to actually make people understand SDGs, to make people understand how the greener would be, and let us be smart enough to actually be living in this society very easy and happy. That's not a big word, but it's a really difficult word to create. By doing so, we care more about each of the household and the small people and the vulnerable groups. So by doing that, every step of the way, even the digitization that we're trying to put in, we are not aiming at building any huge digital system, or we are trying to actually put every automation or AI in everywhere. No, that's not our first approach. The first approach that BMA has been doing for the past 3 months is trying to understand each of the household, trying to understand each of the segments, try to understand each of the alleys, as well as each of the type of the people and the struggling problem that they have, and trying to deliver what is the solutions for that small group of the people. If we can do that, then we ease up the norms of the society to actually turn that self from what they struggle every day into trying to help make the society greener. And that's what I call smarter in terms of trying to implement things that we've been communicating on. Under that, my governor has 9 strategies, and he brings out all the good 9s to everyone: safety, health, being good environment, being good construction, being good transportation, mobility, good education, good management, good creativity, good economy. By all of that, I think not a single one that serves smarter and greener. And I don't think single one serves SDGs. I think every one of that 9 serves SDGs, and also being smarter and greener. And those things are all connected. As my Minister of Finance said, when you try to correct or have solution in one way of the problem, it will be connected to the other way. I'm standing here trying to sell out what Bangkok has already been done for the past 3 months and so on. But I definitely accept I can't do that if I don't have support from Green Financial. Basically, we have to might have to create green strategy as well as a green regulations. Bangkok itself as a local administration, a special one. Yes, we have authority as the government decentralized too. But then a long time of regulations and a lot of things has obstructed us as well to be smarter, to actually deliver the greener thing. So we know that we have to go in that path, revising and trying to see if any regulations or protocols that can be done for us that allow us to actually go on. So the other smarter thing that I think is BMA need to actually start answering what we can do and what not. Why do we need to answer this? I don't think BMA can do things all. No, I've been living here in this city for 50 years, so I know what BMA can and cannot do. And by doing that, we ask for help. Surprisingly, since all the executives and business sectors and colleagues here are from private sector, surprisingly, for the past 3 months, we have a tremendous amount of help from private sector and civil societies. A lot of activity that we can accomplish for the past 3 months is actually from those helps. We actually didn't use much of the BMA budget itself, no. A lot of activities that we do. If you arrive here earlier, you will be joining us with a lot of festival, in terms of Pride Festival, in terms of movie festival, and also music festival. But then this month is also turned to be learning, education, science, and non-science kind of month. So this festival has been going on trying to create the way that we are smarter, to think of the world better. This small activity encouraged the small people and everyone in Bangkok to see that Bangkok itself actually has a passion. We really want people who live in for so many years to feel like you guys, that actually think that Bangkok is really good to visit. Try to stay longer, like 9 years. I have my colleagues here introducing me. He sees that all that 9 years, a lot of problem has confront of Bangkok. When we actually have small talk, he also mentioned to me that, I don't know how the city survives. I enjoy the same feeling. And when we talk about these policies, then BMA, we actually start doing a lot of things. As the governor might also mention, let me actually address some that we already done and our intention to do more. Let me start by grabbing from His Excellency Minister of Finance talking about aging society. Just this morning, we just launched one sandbox that is trying to connect between primary care to secondary care and tertiary care. The way we do is because we want everyone, even a small people, an elder, or even a small children who live in a very small alley, in a very density kind of community, to reach out for the primary care as a standard can provide. And with those standard and health promotion, we then promoting how to actually make their condition of living better by both what BMA can support and what they actually can help themselves in terms of community effort, strengthening those communities to be able to actually confront with the problem. And definitely, we do digitalization into that. We are trying to bring telemedicine in. And basically, we also apply one of the purpose of ESCAP as well, that we create what we call motherlands. New word again, that's my governor word. Because in Bangkok, you guys all know about traffic, right? So the 8 golden minutes would not be able to achieve in terms of delivering care to the critical patient. For those 8 golden minutes, then we send emergency medical team through the motherlands, which is applied for motorcycle and ambulance. So with that and telemedicine, the help of the first aids can actually arrive to the people firsthand and prolong the time to the ambulance to arrive. And those telemedicine would help. We already opened one sandbox in another side of Chao Phraya River. So we cover that area and hope that if this sandbox work, and with those motherlands as an EV motorcycle, if that work, we can actually shoot out both of the goals of creating good health and good environment altogether. This is one of the examples that we actually accomplish on. Talking about EV, the Bangkok itself, I can't claim that that is under this management, no. Bangkok itself has been transforming and changing the way they use alternate energies for the past couple of years. They are trying to actually make, at the very least, any authority that BMA can reach to, for example, any building, any MOU, any cooperation with private or entrepreneurs, as well as the vehicle within Bangkok itself. We are trying to actually reduce the number of the vehicles that actually harm the environment. And we are actually speeding things up. The governor himself and all the management team is trying to achieve in not only the transportation vehicle of the Bangkok itself. Right now, we are looking into trying to transform and change both of how the business cooperation in terms of changing the vehicle and alternate energy, as well as how to actually BMA can support. For example, the electrical charger in those parks, we are trying to increase the number of it so that people who use it doesn't feel too much of the burden to use it. As well as we are trying to create a public transportation system that is very well connected, but that's not a very fast one. The speed of trying to connect all the public transportation in Bangkok needs time. And I accept it's not a full, comprehensive, complete cycle yet. It means that people are still required to drive personal cars out of their homes. So to convince them, we need a nurturing system as well, how to do the incentive so that they can actually use those alternate energy in every single way. So we're trying to do that. We're considering feeding system or the feeders to connect those transportation together. And definitely those feeders in some routes that we are trying to do in the future would definitely using EV or electrical vehicle. And when we talk on that, also, in the hospital that I'm actually directly responsible for, BMA has 12 hospitals. We are planning to use solar energy to those hospitals and provide that to community nearby as well. That is also in our consideration to the help from a lot of public agencies as well as the private sector as well. That's for the second example. And also, we are trying to create what I call smarter lifestyle. So basically, by doing that, we're creating, that I mentioned in the first place, food bank. We are trying to create what we call waste system. Those kind of system would actually help people to live their life in their home easier. And by easing that up, we hope that the norms of the people, because when you talk about SDGs, when you talk about being smarter and greener, it doesn't actually require only public side, government side, or even stakeholder side. We are talking about the cooperation of all the people together as well. So we try to create that as well. So by all means, with all those efforts of BMA, we are hoping that we actually accomplish trying to both solve the problem of Bangkok itself, as well as creating the new way of life, that taking care of their life before we actually trying to tell them that taking care of the environment, taking care of one another, because you will confront with a lot of argument that their life is not better yet. 2.5 years went by, and we actually saw a lot of the problem, a lot of gaps. A lot of people who live in Bangkok is suddenly poor, out of job, unemployed. And we are living in a very complicated, problematic city already. Transportation, environment, health, and those of the PM 2.5 is coming. We are trying to approach that. So in a way, when they are actually struggle with a lot of problem in front of them, it might not be easy. So last but not the least that we attempt is to make a community stronger. Saying making community stronger is easy though. Making community stronger, making community-based. That is all in our kind of textbook for a long time. Community-based that, community-based those. But what I actually mentioned about trying to make them stronger, make them is actually been recognized. One of the factors that make Thailand as a whole country survive best in COVID-19 is our volunteers. And the volunteers is actually are the closest people who are actually living in the neighborhood, as well as those trust among the volunteers that happen. We have several kinds of volunteers. We have health volunteers. We have disaster prevention and mitigation volunteers. We have local and rural development volunteers. We have trafficking. We have drugs kind of volunteers. We have several kinds of volunteers. But to the new way that we're actually trying, I will mention 2 of the volunteers in our policy as well. First of all, we are actually introducing the technology volunteers, digitalization volunteers. This would actually be a group of the new and young generation that is trying to help. They want to launch a lot of projects that they have. For example, just this morning in the sandbox, without my awareness, I was trying to create Commute Lens, which is a community and communication ambulance that actually can arrive, get into a community very easily, and with those high-tech, with those telemedicine. And then the group of the students from Chulalongkorn University has actually launched their prototype of an X-ray machine as well as the readable machine that actually can read a heart rate and what exactly happened in my stomach, with those acoustic and with those signal sound that actually can be broadcast to these ambulance and commute lens and back to the hospital. This is the energy of the new and young generation. We have a lot of them coming and volunteering, trying to be a technological volunteer. Why are we getting here? A lot of vulnerabilities, the elders and a lot of people in the community The accessibility to technology is not talking about only have Wi-Fi everywhere. You are talking a competency and skill and being able to use those devices, regardless owning the device. So if we have this volunteer together with health volunteer, together with other volunteer, so that people have a capacity to access to this technology as well. With this creation, they understand and being more friendly to this technology and can help we create a better society and better environment. Last but not the least, we also have what we call PM 2.5 detective. This would create from the community, for the volunteer that actually join us to try to actually go examine, inspect those PM 2.5 pollution, environment, and then report that back to our own system. We deploy more of the sensor to the community and the small community, small group of the people, especially in the area that have vulnerable people, the elders and those people who have the problem with their breathing system. So by this, we are pulling back first, the help from everyone here, as well as the private sector and civil society and stakeholders of BMA. Government, who's actually having a lot of resources that can cooperate with us, as well as the change and transformation for BMA itself to actually do good management and make it accountable for the needs of the people. And then the most important thing, while we're trying to approach to everything that I said, we are trying to make sure that even the smallest people in a very smallest alley, in a very smallest community, get all of this development in a very enough, smart way. And by all of this, thank you very much for having me. And let me again welcome everyone to Bangkok. And I hope that you will actually spend your time finding a lot of gaps from today in terms of what else that Bangkok can do. And please come back to tell me what I can do and what we can do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toida, for your address. Excellencies, distinguished participants, we have now come to the end of our opening session and we are now going to move on to the thematic sessions. For the first item on our agenda, we'll be discussing how to align business action and innovation in support of sustainable development. I would like to give the floor now to Mr. John Denton, Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Commerce. He will be joining us online, so I'm very pleased now to turn the floor to him. Mr. Denton.
Thank you very much, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you. I was able to get into Bangkok a couple of weeks ago, and some of the comments made by the previous speaker really resonate. What a marvellous city it is, but what a ripe city it is for even greater improvement. And I look forward to doing what I can to help, and I've got some suggestions as well, which I'll be sending on. First of all, let me begin by thanking ESCAP and the Sustainable Business Development Network for the kind invitation to join you today. And let me congratulate you on the launch of this important new initiative, the Green New Deal for Asia, which is really all about getting the Sustainable Development Goals back on track. Now, friends, the legendary American boxer Mike Tyson once said, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." Plans. In a way, that summarizes where we are today. We have so many plans in the world. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the Addis Action Agenda. We have the Paris Agreement. We have the Glasgow Climate Pact. Every country is supposed to have nationally determined contribution plans. In short, like a boxer about to jump in the ring with Mike Tyson, boy, do we have some great plans. But since drawing up these plans, we have, metaphorically of course, been punched in the face. And not just once, but over and over and over again. We've had a global pandemic which ground the world to a halt. Geopolitical rivalries have re-emerged and tested the ability of countries to agree on anything at all, let alone climate change. And then all of a sudden, we have the war in Ukraine, which has triggered a global energy and cost of living crisis on a scale not seen for generations. And all the while, our emissions have continued to rise and our planet to warm at a pace and scale that poses nothing short of an existential risk to our very humanity. Friends, Mike Tyson did not offer a solution on how to recalibrate plans after getting punched in the face. But his fellow boxer, Rocky Balboa, did when he said, "It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And that's how the winning is done." So the real question is, after all these punches in the face, how do we pick ourselves up, keep moving forward, and ultimately win this fight against climate change? For me, 3 priorities stand out. First, we need to bring on board the private sector to deal with climate change in a meaningful way. The reality is the private sector is responsible for most of the emissions simply because we compose the vast majority of global economic activity. Without the private sector significantly reducing emissions, we will not meet any of the plans that many we've drawn up for ourselves. And we need to fully acknowledge this fact, but we must also recognise, as the Minister did in his opening statement, that the private sector will ultimately be the source of most of the solutions. It's the private sector that innovates. It's the private sector that can create green products. It's the private sector that can finance green investments. Properly bringing on board the private sector not only means policymakers dangling the carrots and sticks to get the incentives right to encourage businesses to both reduce their emissions and be part of the solution, but it also involves more subtle forms of partnership, bringing the business and government together to identify exactly how to get those policy setting rights, how to mobilise companies as advocates for more ambitious climate change. And that is precisely, as I understand it, what this Green New Deal for Asia is all about, and why I'm so glad to commit the International Chamber of Commerce's vast network to support your activities. And it's also why I would encourage the businesses online today to join us, the International Chamber of Commerce, at our business forum at COP27 in Egypt in November. As you may know, we, the ICC, we are the focal point for business and industry for the COP process. And we will have a pavilion for businesses, a series of events and dialogues between industry and governments, and a showroom for businesses to demonstrate your ideas, your solutions, your scalable initiatives. So it's a good networking opportunity and business development opportunity, but it's also a great opportunity, as we've discovered before, to put pressure on governments to lift up their ambition, to actually achieve meaningful outcomes at COP27. It's what we did at COP26 and why that COP can actually claim some success. And this leads me to my second point, which is that getting back up and successfully fighting climate change requires us to raise our collective ambition. So when your eyes are puffy and your body aches and you're about to stand up and face Iron Mike Tyson again in the ring for the next round, it would be so easy to just hope to survive those next 3 minutes and emerge as unscathed as possible. But we don't have that choice with climate change. Global warming will just keep advancing round after round. And we have no choice but to get up, get back on our feet, fight and win. And that requires us to scale our ambition. At COP27, governments must step up and translate the Paris Agreement into effective climate policies with clear decarbonisation and financing plans. These must be coupled with more ambitious nationally determined contributions. And only this, in turn, will provide the necessary positive signals to the markets and incentives for business to further increase their current commitments and actions. And more broadly, we need to raise our ambition across the full spectrum of activities that will need to transform in order to avert catastrophic global warming. We need to green our energy systems. We need to green infrastructure. We need to green finance. We need to green innovation. And we need to green production, consumption, and waste. Precisely the themes that this Green New Deal for the Asia Pacific is proposing to delve into. Of course, we all know the devil is always in the detail, and there will inevitably be a complex balance of incentives to strike. But the key point here is that we need to raise our ambitions across all these areas. And this is another reason why fully bringing on board the private sector is so important. Why? Because we business people, we get it. We get that the more climate change spirals out of control, the greater the risks to companies' bottom line. We get that achieving SDGs would open up new business opportunities worth 12 trillion, especially in agri-food, urban planning, energy and materials and health, and will create 380 million new jobs. And we get that governments ultimately listen to businesses. Good governments listen to their business community. So a core role for business, convinced of the need to limit emissions out of enlightened self-interest, must be to persuade governments to raise their own policy-making ambitions, to make the hard economic trade-offs, and to work with their international counterparts to achieve truly global solutions, even with countries that may not be their best friends. You can count on the ICC and our network across the Asia-Pacific and globally to be making the case to governments to lift their ambitions at COP in Egypt. And I would encourage businesses across the region to do the same with your home governments. Beyond bringing on board the private sector and raising our collective ambition, the third key way to get back up and keep fighting climate change is to unlock finance at the scale required. Let's face it, getting punched in the face can scupper a plan, but so too can simply not having enough money to implement it. Climate finance is absolutely critical, especially for developing countries. There is a great deal of capital, both public and private, available, but we need to give the private sector the reassurance it needs to make long-term investments. That requires governments having coherent policy frameworks that avoid competitive distortions and that de-risk flows of private capital into sustainable investment opportunities. It requires, at a more basic level, governments providing the private sector with easily understood and bankable projects to invest in. And it requires unlocking finance for the development of transformative technologies and innovation. Friends, given that small and medium-sized businesses, which are the lifeblood of Asia Pacific, are the most likely to develop innovations, as the previous speaker was identifying in her experiences in the sandboxes in Bangkok, these innovations will help reduce emissions, or hopefully even reverse climate change. We need to give SMEs access to finance generally, and particularly generous conditions for projects and business models that could provide or help scale up climate solutions. The fight against climate change is not a sport. The fight against climate change is not a spectacle. It is quite literally a fight for the future of our planet. After all, it's the only one that we have. So once again, I commend the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network for this initiative. I commit to providing the International Chamber of Commerce's full support. And I hope that we can work together across the Asia Pacific and the broader world to make COP27, the African COP, a success and bring the power of the private sector to bear on the most important challenge of our time. Thank you for the opportunity to join with you today, and good luck for the rest of the discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Denton, for those very vivid metaphors and imagery about the fight against climate change. I would like to draw everyone's attention to the fact that we have a questionnaire for all our participants in this forum, and we will be putting on the screen now a QR code. By scanning this QR code, you can help us fill out the questionnaire and we can get feedback about this event. Thank you, everyone. We are now going to move on to the next roundtable of this session. Our first moderator will be Ms. Deborah Bieber, the Chief Executive of Blue Moon Advisory, Hong Kong, China. I would like now to invite Ms. Bieber to take control of the session, and I'm sure we all look forward to hearing about the new initiatives developing in the realm of sustainable business. I invite Ms. Bieber and the other panellists for the first roundtable to please come up and take their seats. Thank you all.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. As was said, my name is Deborah Bieber. I'm also the chair of the UN ESCAP Sustainable Business Network's Digital Economy Task Force, so have been very much part of this Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business as have most of the people in the room today. So thank you again. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce my panelists. And given that their experience is so broad and so deep, I will have to read from my notes, so please forgive me. To my right, it's my honour to welcome Kunrun Vedi, thank you, who is the Secretary General of the Securities and Exchange Commission for Thailand. And to her right, Mr. David Morris, who's the Vice Chair of the ESBN and Special Advisor Sustainable Development for the Trans-Pacific Advisory Organisation, and a number of different other organisations. And you'll find a more detailed background piece on both of them, but I'll give you a little bit of, that's on the website, and the website, I'm hopeful that the website address will be up there at some point. Our purpose today, of course, is to talk about the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business, and building on what has been said previously in what I would consider to be 3 or 4 excellent presentations, really just first class, top notch, and absolutely right on point. But a little bit about Ms. Ruanvadi, Kun Ruanvadi, and she obtained a first class honours gold law degree from Chulalongkorn University. She's a barrister at law from the Institute of Legal Education, Thai Bar Association, and an LLM, which is a business law degree from Harvard Law School, and an MBA from the Walter Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. Remarkable background academically, thank you. Her long experience in the public sector has forged her strong public service mindset. She has served in several key positions at the Ministry of Justice, and since 2019 and her appointment as Secretary General, she's been working extensively to build an ecosystem that supports a sustainable capital market. And I think we've had a lot of information about the need for green finance and support, and we'll get to that a little later on. She's a member of several committees, including the Public Sector Development Commission, the National Reform Committee on State Administration, and the Law Development Committee. So a thoroughly experienced and humbling background. Thank you so much. David Morris is an international consultant advising organisations on international economic cooperation, future trends, opportunities, risks, relationships and reputations. He has a number of advisory roles. They're also up on the website, but he recently represented the International Organization of Oceania, the Pacific Islands Forum, as Pacific Trade and Investment Commissioner in Beijing, and has worked to build economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific for decades, as a diplomat, trade official, and senior political advisor. He has also had 2 diplomatic postings in Europe and advised Australia on United Nations peacekeeping undertakings. He established and was the first executive director of the China Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He's currently completing a PhD, is a member of Erasmus and Jean Monnet Research Network on Asia and Europe, economic relations, and has an MBA from Henley Business School and a BA from the University of Sydney. Again, 2 highly qualified, academically robust speakers on the panel today. Now, I have a number of questions to ask you both, and I'm going to, given everything that's been said to date, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it up a little bit and between the 2 of you with the questions. So we'll start with David, because he is absolutely the sort of the core of the Asia Pacific Green Deal. And it's a very simple question, David. Why is ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, why are we advocating an Asia Pacific Green Deal for business?
Well, thank you, Debbie. It is a simple question in a sense, isn't it? Because I think we are all convinced today, finally, in 2022, it's not a matter of debate anymore that we need the green transformation, that we need to shift to a new way of living on this planet. It has taken us a long time. These debates have been going on for decades, for a long time. On the island that I grew up in off the coast of Australia, the beach that I used to go to as a child disappeared about 30 years ago. I was back there 10 years ago and the house of my best friend had disappeared. It had burnt down in the worst bushfires in recorded history. I've got my own stories for why I'm convinced it's time to act, and I think you all do. Everyone has your own experience, your own reason for why we need to commit to change faster and more effectively than we have done in the recent decades when we have known this was coming. We've known for a long time that climate change is going to turn into a climate crisis. And those suffering floods in Pakistan today or crises all around the world know that this is something governments must act on. But we're here today to talk about why the business sector needs to act on it. And we just heard very eloquently from John Denton of the International Chamber of Commerce about the reasons for why the private sector has to be central. So I don't want to repeat anything that he said, and I won't have metaphors as strong as his either. But as he did say, business is at the centre of this. Business actually drives economic development. We know here in the Asia Pacific, we've had a stunningly successful series of decades of economic development, and that's been a result of largely private sector driven investment. It's also been about the private sector quite often working in very constructive partnership with government as well, and we've seen a diversity of models across the Asia Pacific. We have a diversity of nations, of political systems, of economies, and across the region generally we've seen great success in economic development. But now we have to switch to making that development sustainable, and it will be business that needs to be in the driving seat, just as business was in the driving seat of development in previous decades. So it's not enough, although it's great that governments are committing to the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's not enough for governments alone to set the policy agenda and the goals, because the goals, it is like jumping into the ring with a plan, right? The plans are there, but we have to start actually doing it, and that's going to require the private sector to work with governments and with communities. And so our concept here of a Green Deal is very much about business at the heart and business leading a process of partnerships, of building partnerships across value chains, in regions, of course at the national level, but actually across the whole region. Now, there are Green Deals in other parts of the world. They've tended to be more political processes. So in Europe, in North America, this term Green Deal has been used, or Green New Deal, and it's often had political overtones. That's not the case here. What we're talking about in Asia Pacific, just as with our development agenda of the last few decades, that hasn't been a political process either. The development successes of Asia have actually been across a diversity of political systems. And so equally, the way that we respond to the climate crisis has to equally be open to a diversity of approaches, and that means having business at the centre of this. And so that's our concept, a business-led Asia-Pacific Green Deal.
Thank you, David. In terms of sustainability, we're supposed to be 10 years away from attaining the SDGs, and I'm going to ask you to build on what David has said, Kunruanvadi, and that is, what are the expectations and requirements of publicly listed companies in Thailand or indeed anywhere in the Asia Pacific, and what current listing standards are used as a reference when designing these local standards. And we're talking about business supporting a Green Deal or the SDGs.
Thank you, Deborah, and then thank you for you and ESCAP for having me today. Talking about 10 years from now, some people might think it's quite a way, but some people think it's a very short distance, you know. Let me start by saying this, that this is a journey that we together, public and private, need to be along together, heading for the same direction. That is, how could we have a sustainable sustainability world and achieve the UN SDG? When you're talking about the business, I must say, I think not only in Thailand, but all over the world, that we have to work together. And for the listed company, we work as a regulator together in this globe. We have a so-called IOSCO, which is the security regulator organization. Like the Minister of Finance, he mentioned that this is a world of two items. One is the green, and second is about digital. So that as a regulator in a capital market, we have to ensure that we would accommodate and cope with these two new trends. But again, we can't work by ourselves. And then so that with this, we have to tell you that for the listed company, in Thailand, like other countries in the world, we don't use the concept of approval, but rather we use the concept of filing and make things be disclosed. I think this is the right moment for Thailand. I'm so pleased to inform you that as of this year, we require as a first time as a mandatory disclosure of the so-called sustainability. This is in addition to the financial disclosure. But again, luckily that we have a major company or big firms that do a very early adoption. But we're talking about listed company, we have to cover all size of the firm. We have at the moment 700 plus already. So that together within this year, 1st January, that all 700 plus, they disclose their sustainability into area. One is about the climate change, how to cope with the climate change to minimize or the impact on that. And second is about the human rights. The UN GP on that, you see. And we have to tell you that with the contribution, with the cooperation of listed company, I think that we took almost 2.5 years to move this requirement together, you know. We can't just say that, oh, tomorrow we would like to everyone to do things, you know. But we have to make sure that during the past 2.5 years, we first raise awareness, how important that you have to make a Thai market to be a sustainable one. Luckily enough that we have a vision from the government. They have a so-called capital market plan. They want to move the Thai capital market to be competitive and also to be sustainable one. So that we have direction very clear, and then we raise awareness. We have to build so-called capability or what you call the training things, you know. Because we don't have only the big firms, we have a middle firm and also their supply chain also. And we have to have every company to make sure their commitment that from the top level, not only for the CEO, but also the board committee also on that, and turn into the action. So that 2.5 years when we launched the idea, whether Thailand is ready or not to make disclose on sustainability. This is good for everyone, not the firm themselves, but also in the eyes of the investor. You know, because you have to fully aware right now that institutional investor, and also coming a trend now, retail investor, they search for the good company. When talking about good company, it means that the company that embed a so-called ESG, environment, social, and governance, into that operation, so that we hope that the sustainability report would make the commitment, the action of each listed company in Thailand to be fully aware by the investor globally and domestically. This is also in line with all the international regulator, and also in this area, in this region, about the ACMF ASEAN Capital Market Forum. I remember only 3 months after I've been at the SEC, at that time, 2019, Thailand was ASEAN chair. And so that the closing in October in Phuket, we could disclose, we could, come into conclusion of the ACMF roadmap for sustainability capital market with the help of all ASEAN country member and also international organization. And in that ACMF, definitely, Deborah, that we have to talk about very important things, taxonomy. How could we ensure that there would not be so-called greenwashing, so on and so forth, and then the disclosure one as well. I think that we on the right trend right now. And if you look around in the globe now, and also in the major index like Dow Jones Sustainability Index, many Thai companies, almost 20 already, be in that Dow Jones Sustainability Index. I think that I can say we are also one of the champion country in ASEAN and Asia to head for sustainability. But again, journey cannot stop anytime or anywhere. We have to move forward and
Absolutely.
make sure along the line that not only your company, but also your counterpart and then your supply chain would also go to the same direction.
Well said, one of the things that I'm interested in is that our focus is where you are, the large end of town, the listed companies, but also the small and medium-sized enterprises, which make up in Thailand over 90% of the economy, and that is the same, it's replicated in exactly the same way throughout ASEAN as well in Asia Pacific. So what is it that you think, very briefly, from your experience, what are some of the challenges that business faces in integrating sustainability in their operations and supply chains? And I'm talking perhaps not the big end of town, but in fact that sort of more medium, smaller end.
Sure. Thank you again. Actually, I grew up from upcountry, from Pattani, you know. This is down south. We talk about medium, the medium size or even small enterprise. I'm fully aware. When you ask what the challenges of that, first they have to realize the benefit of being a company, having observed or do in compliance with the ESG. They have to believe in the benefit of that. And second, the commitment to the society is another part of the key component. And third, again, that they have to make sure that they are not alone. It means that we have to work in cooperation with them. This is a public sector need to give support and some incentive. I think that we heard of these two words this afternoon, support and incentive, you know. And so that, I think that right now we have asked listed company to be the mentor, some kind of that, to be a mentor and make sure that whatever assistance that the large firm can do, they have to move forward on that to make sure that we across the business sector need to be in line together of going forward for sustainability.
No, I think that's absolutely right. So I think those two words and getting listed companies to be the mentors to the small, medium-sized enterprises, particularly as they make up, these small and medium-sized enterprises make up, in terms of services, 80% of the supply chain. So they are reliant, large companies, listed companies, are reliant on that market of small and medium-sized enterprises as part of their operations. A final question to David, if I may, and it's a bit of a zinger, David, because I'm putting you on the spot. How does the ESBN envisage rolling out the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business over the year ahead?
Well, this is about starting a discussion with our networks and with the business chambers and networks across the region about what more should we be doing, what new partnerships can we develop, how can we develop green value chains, how can we actually bring about this transformation much faster, and how can we find the ways to bring green finance to those projects that need them. This is a big conversation. We're only starting today. There are no easy answers to this, but we all know how urgent it is. So first step is to build momentum for the discussion. The first step is to sign up businesses to the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business, to go to the website, and I think you'll see the website soon, and to register your interest on there. And the more businesses that we can connect with and start to drive partnership projects, and our aim will be to come back next year to a bigger and better Asia-Pacific Business Forum with a whole lot of outcomes, a whole lot of projects that we've generated, and a whole lot of new activity to drive the green transformation. And in a sense, to find opportunities in the crisis that we're in. I see that we had an online question about the Ukraine crisis in Europe, and there are all these crises facing us at the moment, multiple crises, geopolitical, political crises, economic crises. The one underlying it all is the climate crisis, and the innovations that we need to find are technological. They're technological innovations. They're about being smarter, moving faster, shortening, diversifying supply chains so that we can do things in a greener, more sustainable way. It's a big ask, but we've got to have the conversation, and we've got to engage businesses in this conversation. So that's what we're starting today.
Thanks, David. We only have a few minutes left, seconds, I should say, left, but we do have some questions from the ether from online, and I would like to just raise them. So the first is the Asia-Pacific Green Deal seems to be inspired by the EU Green Deal. Do you fully take into account the somewhat divergent circumstances of these two areas?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, we totally see this as a different concept. We're using the same terminology, we're using the same language because it is about a deal. It is about businesses, governments, communities. It's about building partnerships. So Green Deal is the right concept, but in the Asia-Pacific, we have to do this in an Asia-Pacific way.
Thank you, David. Another question from the stratosphere is, how do you reconcile the fact that coal is now an alternate to reduced gas flows to Europe due to Ukraine-Russia war? That is going grey instead of green. I think that's a really interesting position, but we are going to always be 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards in our march to the development of a Green Deal. And I think nation states need to be taken into account. And we're in a very particular difficult situation in Europe right now, and Europe's about to go into winter, and it's a crisis, and a crisis requires perhaps not the most ideal response, but it requires nonetheless a response that is relevant to the people who live in Europe. I don't think there's anything more to be said on that one. Sorry, I have to take off my glasses. the time frame for developing alternate energy. Thank you. My question's moving around. The time frame for developing alternate energy to fossil fuel will take a long time, at least 5 years onwards. Are the developed nations exempted from green sanctions? I don't really know what that means. I'm sorry. David, can you interpret that?
I think the point that's being made here is that we're all going to have different timelines, and that's of course the case, that different nations are going to be able to move at different speeds, but we all have the same end point in mind here, and that is that by mid-century we really need to be bringing the world economy to net zero. If we don't, we are heading above 1.5% warming since the industrial age, and that means catastrophic climate change. Now, if we get to 2%, which is, and we're on track to above 3% growth at the moment, by the way. So if we continue as we are, we're going to absolutely destroy the planet, and there's so much scientific evidence for this now, it's no longer a debate. But the question about speed of individual countries moving, I think we all accept that countries need to move at different speeds, but we've just got to all be agreed on where we're headed mid-century, and that's where the business sector comes in, because it's innovation. If we can redesign our economies, if we can find smarter, more sustainable ways to do things, to move goods around, to produce things, to manage our waste better, all those things that at the moment we do in a very wasteful way, causing a huge environmental footprint. If we can apply our innovation, our business innovation, to a lighter footprint on this planet, we're going to have to do that, and we're going to have to do it by mid-century. But there are huge business opportunities in getting this right.
Thank you, David. That was an elegant answer to a difficult question. I think that that's really all we have time for today. Unless there are any questions from the floor, we could take one. Anyone with a burning question? Perhaps not, perhaps not. I'm interested just to know, do you think there's a need to legislate ESG requirements? I mean, you've just done something like that with listed companies. Mm-hmm. Do you think that exists in the general business universe?
I guess that we should start with the buy-in approach rather than putting in a descriptive legislation, right? You know, and then the reason why I share with you is a success for Thailand, if I may, because we have 3 pillars: self-reinforce, and then the market force, and the last is about regulatory force. We rather have the first 2 work together by the company themselves, by investors themselves, and regulation come later. This is what I can share, because I think that if you have too many laws, somehow there is overlapping. And again, talking about enforcement, this is a key, you know. I mean, but again, in some may think the law is necessary, but I think I rather go with buy-in, by your willingness.
Yes.
To do this kind of ESG, and also the ESG is a heart of the so-called risk management of each company. You know.
Motivation.
Yeah.
Motivation.
Right.
The carrot, not the stick.
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Well, that's all we've got time for in this particular panel session today. Please do stick around for the rest of what will be a fascinating afternoon. And join me in thanking Kun Ruanvadi and David Morris for their insightful comments and experience sharing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Biber, for expertly managing our first roundtable. Thank you, everyone. And to our expert speakers for so clearly setting out the recent developments in the region and what we can expect of the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business. Our next roundtable will go deeper into the coming green transformation, and so we have a full panel of speakers who are generously sharing their expertise. I would like to ask now our moderator, Mr. Kaveh Zahedi, the Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to come and take the floor. And I invite all of our next panellists to please join Mr. Zahedi on the floor. We also have some panellists joining online for our next session too. So, Mr. Zahedi, I give the floor to you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, MC, and we'll just give a few moments to our panelists to join. Well, thank you, and a very good afternoon to everybody. I know it's been quite a compressed and packed a couple of hours here, hearing about the Asia Pacific Green New Deal and some of the initiatives our region is taking. So we have a very nice panel, and as the MC said, our hope is to sort of bring the Green New Deal to life, because it's not a blank slate. It's not something that has just been invented out of nothing. It really is about capturing a momentum and a direction that probably the region has already embarked on. And those pillars are indeed what our esteemed panelists are going to delve into, and we have as speakers, and I was please excuse me because I was threatened by my own colleagues that I'm not allowed to give very long, lengthy description of your bios, but allow me to at least name the panel, if I may. And we have Mr. Hendrik Rosenthal, who's the Director of Group Sustainability at CLP Holdings Limited. We have also online Mr. Daniel Ross, the Chief Investment Officer of BTS Group Holdings, Mr. George Yuan, the Board Director of Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. We have also on stage here Ms. Ratan Nasiri Tilok Skulchai, who's the Managing Director of Tetra Pak Thailand. And last but by no means least, we have online Mr. N.R. Narayana Murthy, who is the founder of Infosys. And that is, in fact, exactly where we're going to start our conversation, is with Mr. Murthy. He's, I'm sure, known to everybody, especially the ESPN community, as the founder of Infosys, and has won so many accolades as a visionary and top businessman. So, Mr. Murthy, coming to you first, and immediately, one of the pillars of this Green New Deal for business is very much about innovation, and that's where David actually finished in the last panel. It's about accelerating and scaling up innovations for sustainable development. So when we have this challenge of improving efficiency, lowering costs, reducing the environmental impact from the way we produce, the way we consume, the way we transport, work, trade, pretty much in everything, and conduct business, all of this is going to require new business models and indeed digital innovations and solutions. So how is that possible? How can we accelerate digital innovations in the region in support of sustainable development, the Green Deal, the SDGs, and the Paris Agreement? Mr. Murthy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kaveh. Let me first state a few facts about the journey of sustainability at Infosys, my company. Infosys' vision for sustainability by 2020 was to achieve net zero environmental footprint, that is net zero non-renewable energy and net zero emissions, zero discharge of wastewater, zero discharge of organic waste, zero waste to landfill. Now, we have achieved these targets and we are continuing our journey. We have been recognized by Newsweek as one of the top 8 greenest companies in the world. Our energy consumption of new buildings is less than 75 kilowatt hour per square meter per annum. It is among the best global energy efficiency designs. About 28.6 million square feet out of 46 million square feet of our buildings are certified as LEED Platinum, that is the highest green rating buildings by the US Green Building Council. Infosys has 34 million square feet of smart connected space spread over 155 buildings. We are a consulting company. The number of employees increased by 166% between 2008 and 2020, but the electricity usage increased only by 20%. The company has reduced the per capita electricity usage from 297 units per month in 2008 to just 133 units per month in 2020. We have also eliminated the generation of 2 million tons of carbon dioxide in 12 years. I mean, we are also the first Indian company to join RE 100. That is to show our commitment to renewables. Today, 22% of our total electricity usage is from Infosys' own solar power generation. Another 22% is from the solar power purchased from outside, and 56% is from thermal and hydro power from the grid. We have reduced per capita water usage by 64% between 2008 and 2020. The company today uses only 39 liters per person day. I mean, I can go on and on, but now what is it that we did? How did we create an environment of innovation, enthusiasm for to innovate, enthusiasm to march ahead in this journey? We believe that achieving a sustainable planet is perhaps the most important and urgent action of the day. One way of improving sustainability is improving efficiency and productivity. As you said, Kaveh, by reducing time, reducing cost, by reducing use of raw material, and by reducing waste, or ideally avoiding waste. These are possible from innovation in technology as well as innovation in management. A world-class corporation, we believe, always competes with itself by reinventing and innovating on a constant basis. For that to happen, the first requirement is focused attention by top management. That is a must. Second, progress in sustainability should be part of the company's overall scorecard at the board level. Third, we believe that innovation should not be just the preserve of a chosen few in the research department. Everybody from the janitor to the chairman of the company must bring innovation. Next, we believe that youngsters in an organization are the most effective in bringing forward new ideas. They are more open-minded, they are less scared of challenging the status quo, and they are less scared of the failure. They are more energetic, and often they're smarter than older people. We believe that innovation thrives in a pluralistic, intellectually curious, and competitive environment that reveres meritocracy, competence, enthusiasm, optimism, dignity, fairness, transparency, confidence, daring, humility, openness, collaboration, value delivered to the customer, and excellence in execution. Innovation requires, we have found, a strong customer orientation and a clear objective orientation. It is also necessary to incentivize employees to innovate. We at Infosys ensure that 30% of any group that takes strategic decisions on sustainability are under 30. Every year, we celebrate an ideation day at Infosys where team members under 30 years old present their own innovative ideas. The company evaluates them and accepts them if they are found useful. It is a good idea to create a body of knowledge to save the do's and don'ts of the work done in sustainability by any individual or by any group so that the entire organization can benefit from it and improve its productivity in the sustainability effort. Infosys created knowledge currency units to be awarded to incentivize both the creator and the users of the knowledge artifacts. These units would be converted to cash, distributed to both the creators and the users of the knowledge artifacts at the end of the year. We have realized that we also need the wise heads of our elders to provide support, encouragement, and resources to our youngsters to reach for the stars and to be a safety net in terms of failure. Finally, I believe that UN and ESPN can indeed play an important role in enhancing innovation in organizations by holding workshops on how leading organizations in the region have moved forward in sustainability through creating an innovative environment in their own organizations. ESPN can also create a body of knowledge for corporations to achieve sustainability. Let me stop here. Now, I have to leave now because I am the host to a delegation from Vietnam, and that is, they are coming at 16:10 your time. Therefore, I hope you'll kindly excuse me. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm indeed honored to have been given this opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Murthy. And if I could sum it up, it's that setting the bar very high on sustainability issues has not in any way been a barrier to Infosys becoming a world-class company. It is what has made Infosys a world-class company and in many ways an inspiration for many of us. And thank you for the pointers as to how the Green New Deal could actually help to energize and what kind of role our ESPN network and indeed the UN could play. Let me then jump straight back here onto the stage, and Kun Ratanasiri. One of the things that Mr. Murphy referred to was, that it makes business sense in many ways. Using less resources makes business sense. You save in the inputs. And we know that the Asia-Pacific region is not the most efficient region in terms of units and productivity. But the new circular production and consumption practices are beginning to show themselves, and are certainly urgently required if we are to maximize the resources and resource efficiency and minimize the environmental impacts. So could you maybe pick up on that and tell us what are the challenges facing businesses in embracing the circular economy practices, or maybe the bio-circular green economy practices, as our Thai hosts mentioned earlier?
Okay, sure. And thanks, Kaveh, for having me here. So, if you talk about sustainability, right, this has been in the front and center of what we do at Tetra Pak. For the last 70 years, we've been working with our partners to drive sustainable growth that we proudly say protects food, people, and planet. It is our ambition to really drive and be a leader in sustainability transformation. And by saying that, meaning that we want to make sure that we contribute to sustainable development and making positive impact and through our products and services, and that is really something that in the industries and communities that we operate. Having said that, of course, with what the previous speakers will talk about being punch in the face, and with the recent events, right? We have war, we just coming out and still lingering around the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So this definitely have had put even more pressure and challenges on top of the usual business challenges, right? We have had issues with raw material, with supply chain, with logistic disruptions, with human resources and challenges, and definitely the inflation. So those are definitely putting pressures. And normally, we would say, and we already know that the cost of raw materials and for circular economy practices are higher. And to practice circular economy is definitely more costly than practicing, say, traditional business practices. So those, how can we navigate through that, right? Meaning that continue to stick to our goal. I think, managing costs is definitely key business challenges. And more importantly, it's about to continue to drive collaboration. I think it is, continue to have the commitment, because it's going to take time and effort from everyone and all the partners to ensure that we continue to drive circular economy and sustainability development in this environment. And we remain committed.
So in a way, following up on that,
Yep.
on that, I mean, you mentioned that it is a time of crisis. We do see actually the price of many raw materials increasing. Obviously, the price of energy. Does that not help rather than hinder our move towards a more circular economy? Does that not even make the business case stronger? Because in essence, it helps with the bottom line.
I think it does make the business case stronger, and thanks for that. I think that's a great point, but that is going to be in the long run. I think in the short term, people still have business priorities to really make sure that, the business continuity, I think, is the first priorities for many businesses. But I think they definitely see the importance of driving circular economy, because that's the only way to make sustainability sustainable. And I think, so when everyone works together, I think that's going to help with the scaling up of this. And definitely in the long run, I think we will see the impact of that.
Thank you very much. And I think we will come back on this scaling up issue, because I think it's going to be a big one for us to try to resolve together. Let me bring in another one of our panelists from online, Mr. Henrik Rosenthal, who's the Director of Group Sustainability at CLP Holdings. Mr. Rosenthal, how can we, in a way, we've talked about the resource efficiency, and a big part of that is energy, and it's probably one of the biggest pieces of the sustainability puzzle. How can we accelerate the energy transition in our region to meet the commitments of the Paris Agreement, to meet the commitments of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? How do you see it in terms of the challenges we face to make that energy transition, especially from the perspective, I guess, of electricity utilities?
Or letting me join here online. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Okay, perfect. Very good, thank you. Well, in response to your question, and just to get right into the discussion, maybe it'd be good to sort of provide an example of what we are doing at CLP, and what I think we should be sort of pushing further along the side of energy and energy supply. For just by background, CLP Holdings is an electric utility. We are a company headquartered in Hong Kong, have been there for over 120 years, but we've over the years made significant investments across the region, operating in Australia, mainland China, India. And we have a mixed portfolio of assets. So we've been generating electricity, of course, with coal, with natural gas. We have nuclear power investments, and we've been increasingly focusing our business on renewables over the years. And maybe let me just sort of illustrate the change and the transition that we've been looking at over the years in terms of what that means for us at CLP, and really taking climate change to heart. Fundamentally, it's about shifting your business strategy. So it's not about creating a sustainability strategy as such. It is a business strategy with sustainability built in. We've developed a climate vision, as we call it, our Climate Vision 2050. And it's really about giving us a trajectory to net zero, but also shifting our investments, directing our investments, and also about acknowledging transition risks as part of this transformation. It is also about acknowledging physical risks, physical climate risks, and how do we manage those in terms of the changes we do expect and that are already happening within our operating areas and our supply chain. And it is also about really identifying new business opportunities. So electric utilities traditionally have been very much focused on generating and distributing, transmitting electricity to our customers. But it is also what we feel where we need to make a big contribution is also enabling our customers to use this particular product, the electrons, the electricity, more efficiently. And that's where we want to see more growth going forward in our business. We are the first major Asian electric utility to actually set a climate vision. And we did that as early as 2007. So we've been working on this for a number of years. And this is really what we're talking about it's our decarbonization roadmap. It's the decarbonization of the electricity that we send to customers. That's been our key focus since then. And over the years, we are now at this point, our operating earnings, actually 2/3 of those are from zero carbon activities that we have as part of our business. So it's work in progress. We are not yet 100% there, but we have been really focused on this. And we continue to update this vision as technologies progress, as markets develop, as regulations shift and enable us to move more quickly. And we just launched a new climate vision just at the end of last year, well, just before COP26, actually. We really updated our targets, our commitments. We now have a science-based target for 2030 at a well below 2-degree trajectory. We have our 2040 target along that same pathway. And we've made a commitment to accelerate our coal phase out. So that's part and parcel of our decarbonization pathway, to really accelerate that phase out from what we previously had at 2050 now to 2040. And that's across the entire portfolio of CLP and all the regions where we operate. And then to get to net zero by 2050. Now, this pathway is a well below 2 degree. It's not a 1.5 degree yet. And that's because we are very conscious of how can we actually get this done. It's not really it's not for the sake of setting a commitment or a target. It's really a business strategy. So how can we execute this transition in time or along a 1.5 degree trajectory? That's what we're looking at doing next. And we have a commitment to review these targets that we currently have on a continuous basis. Just to sort of illustrate the difficulties or the realities that we work with in terms of actually making this happen as a business, the target that I just outlined to you, these new targets that we set, this was not something that, I don't know, the sustainability department dreamed up or that the CEO office wanted to have because that sounds good and that's what our stakeholders are expecting. It was really a bottom-up approach. We went through each of our businesses. What can we do to accelerate this transition? What can we do to accelerate the phase out of coal? How can we accelerate our investments in renewable and zero carbon electricity supply? And how can we accelerate these new business opportunities in terms of supporting our customers to decarbonize? So we received a number of recommendations and feedback from the business units. We brought that to our senior management team, the Sustainability Executive Committee, and it was then reviewed. The different proposals that came through were reviewed at the highest level of the CLP group, at the Sustainability Committee, which is a board level committee, and signed off by them, and then finally by the CLP Holdings board in terms of actual targets and achievements we need to have in the next 10, 20, and 30 years. So what I really, I guess, want to stress for today it's really something that is quite fundamental, and we really need to take this to heart going forward, looking at all the work that's been going on, not just at CLP, but across the region and across the world. There's been so many pledges, so many commitments. We really need to take action. And this needs to be from the ground up. This needs to be embedded within businesses. And there needs to be a clear understanding from each company in terms of where are your risks in terms of climate or broader sustainability framework, and how do we get to the SDGs? What are the different responsibilities that each player in this ecosystem has to achieve those? And this really requires a fundamental rethink of business and business strategies, but also investments need to happen. For us in the electric utility space, these are massive investments. And this is where we've had a lot of support from our investors. We're a listed entity in Hong Kong. And really sort of expectations set for us in terms of our decarbonization pathway and how they can support us in that endeavor. But importantly also, and this is maybe where I'm sort of a bit divergent from some of the earlier comments that were made here today, it is also about setting a level playing field. You cannot just put the burden of change on business alone. If a company wants to transform and so quote unquote do the right thing, they cannot be disadvantaged by doing so. So regulatory changes and tools that are available for regulators must come forward. And it is no longer enough, in my view, in my humble opinion, it is no longer enough to simply make pledges and commitments. We need to take action. And action for business, yes, but also action from government. And this is where this needs to come together. And this is where we can really push forward in terms of best practice and bringing this whole agenda that's outlined in the Green Deal. This needs to come to life. It can't just be something we think we should do. And it sounds right. Yes, we know that. This is not new. These are not new things. And I appreciate all the work that's been gone into developing this and the review and the sort of shocking results in terms of there's been no progress on the SDGs in Asia Pacific up until pre-COVID. We really need to move beyond these commitments and pledges. We really need to take the time to think through what it really means to take action. Every company needs to do this, and governments need to support these transitions with not just carrot, but a bit of stick to get us there and to make progress.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I think the work you've obviously done is inspirational. I think you've also given us some hints as to how we bring the Green New Deal for business to life. It has to be linked, as you said, to the science-based targets, but it's also got to bring together the business community with the governments who are in a way responsible for that enabling environment, and where better than in a setting like the ESPN, which is of course exactly that, a collaboration between the business world and the UN. And I also took your point that you put it very nicely, and a little bit like Mr. Murthy before you. You said that shifting the business, it's about shifting the business strategy, not developing some sort of parallel sustainability strategy. And I think that's exactly what Mr. Murthy was referring to as well. Thank you very much, Hendrik. So let me again bring the conversation back into the room, and we have Daniel Ross, the Chief Investment Officer of BTS Group Holdings. Daniel, the question that we had for you is how can we decarbonize the transport system? It's one of the big ones, right? How can we decarbonize the transport system by 2030 and ensure a transition to zero-emission transport systems? I mean, the last speaker talked about massive investments needed. If any of the big transformations requires massive investments, surely transport is one of those. So how it's a tough nut to crack. How do we crack it?
It is, yeah. It's absolutely. It's an asset-heavy industry and highly regulated. Before I answer the question, I think it's important to clarify the scope of what we say when we say decarbonize transportation systems. So if by transportation systems you mean all transportation systems, land, sea, and air, you include operation as well as manufacturing and upstream and globally. Sorry to break it you, but there's no chance that that's going to be decarbonized by 2030. Bringing the scale down a little bit more, let's say rail-only operations, 2030, absolutely. It's quite simple in actual fact. You can just electrify the track and the trains and 100% powered by renewable energy. But obviously that's not really ambitious enough. Rail is only a few % of the emissions, and it's not that inclusive, not that many people have access to rail. So we have to let's take it a bit more ambitious, look at the land transport sector as a whole. Okay, so what do we have to do to decarbonize land transportation? Well, more active journeys, so cycling and walking, more renewable energy, more rail mass transit, more product electrification, more shared journeys, and potentially less transport.
So what's preventing us from all of those mores?
Well, there's a lot of challenges, and aside from the 2030 timeline, the challenges. Let me present them in terms of who they present challenges to. Challenges to the passenger, challenges to the government, and challenges to, lastly, the private sector. In terms of challenges to the passenger, clearly when you take a trip, you're only deciding your journey based on 3 factors, like price, convenience, and safety. So it's all very well saying, let's cycle to work. It's good for the environment and it's good for your health. I'm not sure, has anyone tried cycling to work in Bangkok? Have you cycled to work? There's a reason why. It's not Copenhagen. If you don't die of the heat stroke, you're going to dry in the rain. And on the 2 weeks of the year where it is great weather for cycling, you're probably going to get hit by another car. Thailand has an atrocious road safety record. Okay, about 50 people die every day on the roads here. So quite a challenge there. Similarly, it's all very well saying to passengers, well, let's all take the rail mass transit. It's 0 emissions at the point of use. But how many people live close to the rail line? And it's also how many people can afford it. So that illustrates some challenges. Road safety, that's not a quick win. Okay? Developing the network to be expansive enough so everyone can get to it. That's a multi-year, potentially multi-decade build. And subsidizing it so it's affordable, that's actually can be solved quite quicker, which is a nice segue in terms of how the government faces certain challenges, apart from having many priorities, which we have to accept that climate change is often, there's many other challenges, poverty, education, healthcare, so it has to balance that. But even if it was a top priority of the government, coordinating the decarbonization of transport, for example, is a very difficult task. Okay, there's many ministries, etc., involved. It's very complicated. And finally, challenges to the private sector. I would echo Hendrik's comments earlier on in terms of the biggest difficulty would be to actually operate under a climate where it's not a priority of the government. Okay, so without the policy and without the regulations, we can all set targets and we can all, BTS has got a long-term climate strategy, is, to my knowledge, the first carbon neutral company, rail company in the world, so on and so forth. We can all do things, but ultimately, the private sector exists it exists in a state of competition. Okay, so if one company is going to be virtuous and do this, the other companies that aren't being clean and imposing these conditions on their supply chain, that's going to be more profitable, and ultimately it's clear who's going to win. So it has to be government-led.
Okay, so it doesn't yet pay to be virtuous. A lot of what you're talking about, both in terms of challenges and solutions, sounds very local, right? I mean, you had the deputy governor was talking about some of these challenges of having the feeder buses so that you expand the network, so people are tempted out of their cars. etc. Is there any solution, anything that can be done more at the regional level, including through ESPN, through the Green Deal for Business, that can turbocharge some of the changes that you've mentioned?
Well, I think already there's been, at a UN level, on a regional level. So if I include, COP26 in that classification, then there's already been a stimulus provided by that. So COP26, Thailand, finally came up with a target in terms of carbon neutrality 2050 and net zero 2065, and that's a great start. But now, obviously, the policies and the plans they have to follow. I feel like if we're going to focus on ESPN and how it can stimulate the private sector to work together, I think we just have to sort of somehow unify in our approach to again stimulate the government. I mean, that's not to say there are no non-government works that we can do. So we can collaborate together, so BTS Group could collaborate with Tetra Pak on certain initiatives and so on and so forth. But ultimately, when you've got companies in the same sector competing, collaboration is going to be more difficult.
Got it. Thank you very much. Let's bring in our other panelist, Mr. George Yuan, who's the Board Director, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. And I think all of the panelists have to some degree talked about the large-scale investments needed. Trillions of dollars of investments we know are needed to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and so on. Many countries believe that not enough investment is actually flowing into climate change, not just the 100 billion that was pledged in terms of sort of, in a way, public finance, but the trillions that keep mentioned at these COPs, including the last COP that you just mentioned, haven't seemed to shown themselves as clearly as they could. So because countries don't believe investment is flowing into climate solutions, including from the finance sector. And then at the same time, the finance sector, including at COP, it often says that there are trillions available, but there are just not enough investments, good investments, bankable projects, investable projects. How is ICBC sort of broken out of this cycle to identify and finance investments that are, in fact, aligned with delivering on the SDGs and with the Paris Agreement? George, over to you.
In actual fact, it's a very interesting question. As you know that we bankers, like all bankers, have to realize the risk. There are 4 risks here about investing in green transformation. One is the political one. Second is the social. Third is a technical, and then the fourth one is the financial risk. And we bankers have to de-risk all this thing in order to finance. And in as much as I like to tell you how our bank is doing, I'd like to give you a few examples of what happened recently. Like Stuart Kirk of HSBC been talking about the climate change risk, but in actual fact, he say this is not a risk that we need to worry. And however, the bank also is facing 2 different things. One is in Europe, we talk about the green finance. In actual fact, it's a green finance, because a lot of people been burning coal now rather than relied on the gas because of the Russian sanctions. The other thing that we bankers have to consider is that how we have to assess the social risk that we are facing, the technical risk that we are facing. In our bank, because we are a UN Global Compact members, we believe in the 10 principles in responsible banking. So when we review our clients, we have to consider the government policies, how the government can help to set up the regulation, the compliance thing, and how the government is going to settle the social risk that we are facing, and how the political thing like the Ukraine crisis, the climate change, the hot weather, and all these things can affect our bankers' decision whether to issue bonds and also the green issue loans. And within our ICBC, we set up a sort of business strategy that to have every department to have this climate change risk as part of the decision to review the loans. And also, within our ICBC, we have to set up how the department to issue green bonds, and also how we're going to give loans to what green energy business that we have to support. Besides, we have to believe in to make alliance with our bank colleagues. Like in June, we have the Hong Kong Monetary Authority together with IFC, the International Financial Corporation, to form an alliance of banks to review all these financial requests and how we can help to develop a green economy, how to develop a green community, because they need to have infrastructure. How will we support the infrastructure in how to decarbonization and have how to support the renewable thing? So those are the considerations that we have to take into account, and how the government regulation, the compliance, help us to decide whether there's any tax credit for the electric vehicles. Like on August 17, President Joe Biden been signing a climate bill to contain the US dollar $374 billion in supporting the climate change provisions, and then the tax credit. All these are the government policy that all the bankers have to consider, whether to invest or to give loans or to issue bonds to help the green transformation. So the banker have to be very cautious on this thing. So I know that the government itself is always helping to engage the private enterprise to push the agenda. So I think the public and private partnership is important to help bankers to decide how far can we go into all this green transformation thing.
Thank you, George. Maybe I could have a quick follow-up with you. I mean, we did hear in the last session, David Morris was talking to us and reminding us about the pathway that we're on, and we probably don't need that much of a reminder about being on the 1.5 degrees of heating, more or less locked in, going towards the 2, the 3. It becomes more and more scary in a way in terms of what happened. And a couple of the panelists talked about trying to align to that, to have sort of science-based targets that would enable them to to align their businesses with essentially the decarbonization by the middle of the century. For a massive bank like ICBC, is it possible to make that kind of a judgment call and set the science-based targets that would enable you to decarbonize your entire portfolio by the middle of the century? Is that part of the sort of the risk profile that you see?
In actual fact, ICBC has set a target ourselves, if I can read it out from my annual report, that just be patient for a moment, and my ICBC report saying that would like to keep that to 2030 remain to be a net zero target, 2030, by giving loans on this in support of the industry to keep it to 2030. And then the green finance things to have the carbon neutrality before 2060, follow the guidance of the ICBC Group Green Finance Strategy. So we have to practice the concept of sustainable development by expanding our green finance business. So we set two dates, 2030 and 2060.
Thank you very much, George. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Pardon?
I said I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and I'm glad you had the numbers at hand. But I guess it's sort of the recurring question that keeps coming up all the way from when Mr. Murthy started, saying that this is only going to work if it becomes really an integral consideration of each and every business. It's not a corporate social responsibility line, but it's the entire business operation and a recognition of the sort of the world that we live in. But George,
we take it as the social responsibility because we are here to the principle, the 10 principle of responsible banking, but set up because we are being a member of the UN Compact, Global Compact. And probably I repeat now, I find it now, we try to have the carbon emission peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. That's the target we're in as a banker.
Exactly so. So I think that perfectly answers my question, that indeed the ICBC is certainly very much in a leadership position in setting the science-based targets that is going to drive its portfolio. We have a couple of minutes left. I think we have 10 minutes left. Yes, we have about 10 minutes left, and happy to take any questions from the audience or from the colleagues in the room. And while you get your thoughts together, I think this issue, as I said to you, Kun Ratanasiri, this issue of going to scale is one that is a big challenge for us. Because it's not just going to scale in terms of some of the big companies, and we've heard some big companies and big banks, but the previous panel reminded us that the backbone of the economies of this region, certainly Thailand and Southeast Asia, ASEAN, are the small and medium enterprises. So how do we go to scale? How do we replicate the successes of circularity in your case and the greening of the businesses across the economy, including to all the way down your supply chains?
Yep. Okay, thanks, Kelvin. And I think, when we talk about scaling up, right, how do we achieve scale? And definitely, as you said, for all the stakeholders, let's just say in the supply chain, I think it is very important for us as the industry leader to really have concrete plans and clear, meaningful targets that can, basically be communicated throughout the everyone that is involved along the way in all areas of our supply chain. Like, for example, right, for Tetra Pak, we look into first how we source. So, you know, we really need to communicate our targets, how we measure, business of code of conduct, when we look into our suppliers, responsible sourcing, and certification. So I think if we are clear in that and people know what they can, I think, drive towards too, we have to look into how we produce, how we distribute. So, you know, all the way in our factories, our energy consumption, our the emission along the way, and try to find ways to mitigate our climate impact along the way. And I think last but not least really is about how we manage waste. Tetra Pak, that is huge, right? So for us, it is about collection and recycling, and that is, you know, having clear plans and targets will really help our partners when it comes to collection and recycling to know what they should drive towards too. And then if everyone has the clear goals and target, then the scale can be achieved.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And how do we learn from you so that we sort of replicate this through the Green Deal for business?
Yeah.
How can we learn from you? What can we? What advice would you give us as this Green Deal for business is rolled out, to take your learnings to a broader set of our members and of the business community?
Okay. So as I mentioned before, you know, definitely I think, to me, I think personally, it is important to as business to ensure sustainability is sustainable. And then, you know, I've talked before, it is very important that you have concrete plans and you communicate that, and everyone is, you know, understand the challenges and you know, the mitigation plans and what we have to work towards together. And I think most importantly is to remain committed. And that this can be achieved despite of the challenges that we are facing as business at the moment.
So David, you see, we're hearing about metrics, right? Metrics are really important. You've got to set yourself these KPIs, but we don't want to get into the certification business. So how do we thread this needle, right, for the Green Deal for business? That's the challenge that our panelists are putting to us. Let me see if I can bring in anybody from one of our panelists from online. Maybe Henrik, if I can come back to you on the energy transition piece. You know, yesterday we had a fascinating panel associated with the ESBN to do with specifically on finance, and the energy piece was about financing grids in particular, because the sentiment was that there's no way we can reach the scale we need to reach on decarbonization of the energy system without a massive investment in grids, and the discussion about, you know, the green grids and as being one of the only ways of being able to make our region live up to its net zero emission targets. How would you see this idea of you know, scaling up on a massive region-wide scale, and what are some of the possible solutions?
It's an important question. I'm not sure I'll be able to give you all the answers on this particular piece, but I think it's really about identifying priorities for investment. If you're talking about grids, if you're talking about electricity supply, it is about looking at each one of these grids one by one to identify where the opportunities are for investments. And it's about identifying what needs to be done to get to zero carbon or lower carbon supply of electrons, right? This is quite a different piece depending on which market you're talking about. Each one of these markets has their own sort of challenges and regulatory frameworks, right? Electricity is a very heavily regulated industry, the electric utility sector. So, you know, if you look at Hong Kong, maybe I'll just use Hong Kong as an example, because it's a relatively contained grid and we are directly managed by government. So we are essentially on contract to government to deliver electricity at a certain price and supply security, so no interruptions, and then also affordability, and of course having a lower environmental impact, and of course, decarbonizing the supply. And what that means in practice for us in Hong Kong is we are phasing out coal. We are investing heavily in natural gas at the moment. And that is what we would call a transition fuel. And this is where we've actually issued energy transition bonds to help us build a new LNG receiving terminal and to help us finance our new combined cycle gas power plants for Hong Kong. Now that's sort of step one. At the same time, we are looking at investing in offshore wind for Hong Kong. We are in the midst of seeking approvals from government to build an offshore wind farm in Hong Kong waters. And then as a sort of third element, it is about really importing more zero carbon electricity into Hong Kong's grid. And one of our investments is actually a nuclear power plant that feeds directly into Hong Kong. It's based on mainland China. And this is something we are looking to further enhance in terms of either bringing in more nuclear power or zero carbon renewable power into the Hong Kong grid. And this could be our investments even of a new wind farm that are outside Hong Kong waters, but that feeds directly into the Hong Kong grid. So this is sort of the third element, and this is something, all these are happening or are going to happen in the next, say, 5 to 10, 15 years. What comes after that? I mean, at the same time, there's also the sort of more localized pieces in terms of grid changes, and that's enabling homeowners to generate their own electricity, rooftop solar, right? For instance. And then what I mentioned earlier as well is about providing real advice and technical solutions to customers to decarbonize, to reduce their own consumption, to increase the efficiencies. That really needs to be there. But the big piece, though we've done all that, we will still have nuclear, renewable, and gas in our portfolio. So we are not yet there in terms of zero carbon. It is the final piece of the puzzle, the gas piece, that's where we're looking at. And the transformation for us will be about converting our combined cycle gas turbines to be able to utilize green hydrogen as a source fuel. And that's really where the transition is then complete in terms of burning a fuel that is based on that has no carbon content, either in its generation or in its consumption in the actual process of generating electricity from that fuel. So that's sort of the full cycle. That's what we are looking at for Hong Kong, and it's a very contained market. It's heavily regulated. We are reporting directly to government on all these commitments, and we have a contract with government on this. If you look at different markets, there's different regulatory setups. So, I mean, for the purpose of today, probably not sufficient time to really get into that, but it is really about looking at each one individually, one by one. What does it take? And how do we stop investing in coal? And it's about stopping the investments in coal, and then obviously phasing out that coal to replace with lower carbon and a transition fuel, and then ultimately with zero carbon fuels for that electricity supply. But first, we need to stop investing in coal. And I think that should be very fundamental for all of our markets in Asia Pacific.
Well, yes, absolutely. In fact, that's exactly the message that we got from the UN Deputy Secretary General yesterday when she was addressing our meeting. She honed in on the fact that coal and investment in coal is now primarily an Asian problem, right? That needs to be resolved and resolved quickly if we have any hope of keeping to the 1.5 degrees. Daniel, let me come.
That is not the Asian problem, but also Australia problem. Australia, because the Labour Department, the Labour Party government now take over some coal projects because they need that to drive the economy. Otherwise, Australians lose their jobs.
But George, I think it's very clear that in Australia there will be no new coal power plants being built.
Yeah, I know.
There's
no
existing,
deal,
there's existing
from,
facilities, and those will be managed out of as part of a process over time. But certainly, it's very clear in Australia, no new coal power plants will not be built in Australia. That will not happen.
But I think they will take over some of the project left by the previous Liberal Party. Like August 4th, the Australia passed the first piece of climate change legislation. Yet, at the same time, Albanese government will take over 114 new coal and gas projects from the previous government. I know that I agree with you that no new project, but again, those projects is already approved by the Liberal government. The Labour Department is going to take it over. It's also a dilemma that both public and private is facing. How to strike the balance between how to do decarbonization and how affect the economic growth too. Like China, they also encourage the accelerated coal project because of the hot weather have dry up the electricity generation by hydropower. So the same thing happened in Australia, in Europe. It's not just Green Deal, it's a Grey Deal because they need to using coal, particular Germany too. So they are facing a dilemma now.
So,
yeah, no, it's a really fascinating point. If I could just sort of
let me just come in to the panelists.
Yeah.
So I've been told that we've run ourselves out of time, but I think that this last piece shows that there is still a creative tension between what is needed for the planet and what we can deliver collectively, whether through the business side or indeed through the governments, as we were reminded today. But that's exactly where the Green Deal would hopefully fit in, to have this conversation and to see what are the red lines beyond which we can't go if indeed we are to base our businesses and our future on science-based targets that are so important at the business level, at the country level, and of course at the global level. So with my huge thanks to all the panelists for joining and for your incredibly insightful comments. If I could invite a round of applause, please, for the panelists. And with that, allow me to hand back to our esteemed MC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahedi, and to all our panelists for the insight that you've all offered us today. The necessity of transforming our ways of doing business to achieve greater outcomes, they won't be lost on anyone here. So thank you again to all our panelists. So moving on now to the next stage of our program, we turn to the state of smaller businesses and ask what are the opportunities and issues that they're facing in this new green transformation. So I would like to ask our moderator for the next session, Dr. Thematic Subhanit, Chief of Investment and Enterprise Development at ESCAP, and the rest of the panellists for our third and final roundtable onto the stage now. Dr. Tiantip, I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the last session of today. I cannot believe that APBF is only half a day event, because to me it seems like a full day event, and we are full of the program, full of substance, debate, still moving targets about what we can do to achieve our Green Deal for business. So as for the last session of today, you've seen a lot of discussions on how we can implement the Green Deal for business, lots of ideas. However, this last session is also very important because we cannot neglect an important part of society, which is the SME, which make up a lot of companies, more than 90% of companies, not just in Asia Pacific, but all over the world. So today we are very lucky to have, actually my panel has the most on-site participation. So thank you very much for coming all the way to your respective countries. Today we have 5 distinguished panelists from different countries and from different aspects of SME. So I hope that this panel will be very enriching and very insightful from your valuable experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, consumers are actually increasingly aware of their personal responsibility to make smarter choices, opting for brands who offer sustainable goods and implement greener operations. So in this regard, it is quite imperative for SME to actually make a move in their efforts to make their operation greener. So without further ado, I would like to start the session with our online distinguished panelists from Hong Kong. The first panelist will be Professor Louis Chung, the Professor of Banking and Finance, Director of Research Center for ESG from the Hang Seng University of Hong Kong. I believe Professor Louis also has a PowerPoint presentation, but before we put up his presentation, perhaps I also know, Professor Louis, that you've been doing a lot of research on the ESG performance. So I would love to hear on your observations about the SME in Hong Kong, and how do you think about their awareness on the climate change. So Professor Louis, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Tian. I assume that you can hear me clearly. So thank you for the question and having me here tonight in Hong Kong at 5 p.m. at 6 o'clock. And the question that Tian asked is a very critical question. Does Hong Kong as a society, the SMEs, are we ready, have done what in terms of embracing ESG? And to me, I had actually a conversation with one of the big industry organizations that house SME in Hong Kong. And I talked to the vice chairman of the organization, and they told me that I was thinking Hong Kong was not ready. SME have not embraced ESG initiative yet. But after she shared with me, I understand that I realized that now, actually SME in Hong Kong in different name, different title, different jargons, maybe removing lead from the product, maybe following the labor law in different countries, because Hong Kong is famous about having our backyard, the factory is in mainland China, but actually the export to US and European country where the client demand huge standard, high standard on ESG and environmental and social standard. So in that regard, I believe that Hong Kong SME have done something. They are now learning the uniform standard imposed by the ESG channel and see how they can get together to do a better job so that they will follow the international global standard. And we are trying to talk about in my PPT for the next 5 to 6 minutes on the ESG integration for the SME. I hope I answered your question, Tian.
Very well, Professor Louis. Yes, please.
Okay, so if that's the case, I will start to share with my presentation with the PPT. Would that be all right?
Yes, please.
Thank you. All right. So today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about how SME cross over with ESG. And my title as the benefit, the challenges, and the possible directions. I have 5 slides, so don't worry, I won't overrun with my time. So first, what will be the benefit of doing that? I think in these 2-day conferences and from the previous panels, it's clearly that carbon neutrality, nobody debate on that. And it's not just for large corporation, SME, as Tian mentioned, constitute maybe 70 to 90% of GDP for different countries in the UN ESCAP region, member countries. So therefore, it's no doubt a very important initiative to engage green, to engage environmental effort. We have to include SMEs. I think nobody debate that. But the question is how their journey will be different from the larger corporations and how we can help as agency, as banks, as United Nations and governments, local governments, how we can get them off the feet and embrace ESG and jumpstart their journey because they don't have the resources that the other large corporations have. That's the question I want to impose today. And first, of course, benefits are there. And one benefit I start talking 3-4 years ago when Tian and our team from Hong Kong went to Bhutan and talked to the finance secretary over there is to see how we can use maybe a green loan and green lending from central bank eventually to a commercial bank and divide it up into small SME so that they have a uniform standard and getting green lending, getting green financing. Okay. Now with that collective lending needs from the SME sector can be packaged through SDG financing, through the support with UN ESCAP and all the other agency banks, maybe ADB, maybe the AIIB can help to do that so that we can support the ESG effort for SMEs. Now, the other benefit that I want to bring forth today is the ESG journey for SME must use technology. We cannot go back to the paperwork, cannot go back to the human-driven system. So therefore, a technology-driven system with big data in our mind, which will be important for the SME journey to cross over ESG, so that we can have a more efficient system for information gathering, for control, to reduce costs, of course, also reduce the negative impact to the environment. So therefore, in this slide, I'm telling you that SME crossover ESG is a driver to engage technological innovation. It's the time that we embrace both technology, fintech, big data, even AI for the SME platform. Now, if I say this, then you will say, Louis, you are smoking something because the SME does not have the knowledge or the money or the resources to embrace such a journey. So therefore, here is my PowerPoint for chicken and egg. As the previous panel mentioned, I believe that is the speaker from the power company, which I believe that we should have the government mandate. I think we should have the government support to allow the SME to start this journey. So therefore, if you say that, for example, there's a lot of, including Hong Kong government, I realized that when they apply for a grant to help the SME, they would say, well, the SME is the business entity, and if we're helping business entity, there's a commercial interest, so the government only help people that cannot help themselves. Maybe the poor public, maybe the citizens. So to me, the government financing or the agency financing has to really think. If SME cannot get off to start the SME ESG journey, they will never be getting the coverage for the nation because SME cover a lot of their GDP. So therefore, to me, the government has to be there to help to initiate the regulation and financial support to let them have a framework to begin with, including training and computer infrastructure. Now, if we can have that direction, then I would say that let's start the country level to seek funding to set up the SME times ESG framework. And then we have UN ESCAP to serve as a coordinator and facilitator to promote the regional framework through information exchange and advisory activities. And of course, the Asia-Pacific Green Deal that today, the major focus on the Green Deal, will be a very important element because that's environmental. And the five the pillars to support the Green Deal will be there that more relevant to the SMEs as well. My final slide, which is the possible direction, the actual steps. Now, of course, we have to have the framework. And then the SME have to sign up with the framework and utilize it and put information into a platform, electronic platform, web-based platform. And also, other than E, we should also consider S, which is to mobilize the employee, no matter how few employees they have, they should mobilize the employee to engage in environmental related projects. So when you engage that, the social capital, the human capital will be engaged, but on environmental issue. So now, therefore, we are crossover environmental with SE and S. Under this framework, actually, a digital finance and blockchain technology will be employed for efficiency and accuracy. Of course, the amount of data and the number of participants require certain ESG verification for SME loans. And therefore, we require definitely some sort of like a fintech and AI tool to verify that. With that, I'm encouraging all the participants here, especially country representatives and large corporations, to think about how we can help SME to better engage ESG. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Lewis. So you seem to actually lay out some implementation roadmap for us for the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for business. In that case, can I maybe have follow-up questions? So based on your research on ESG performance and what you plan to do going forward in the near future, so how can this research help accelerate our Green Deal for business implementation? I mean, in which pillars and in what way?
Okay, this is a great question. And everything starts with money. I'm a finance professor, so therefore I will seek donation and funding support from government. Of course, we've done something already through the financial resources at my center, the ESG Center at Hang Seng University. We also work with TN and other organizations in Hong Kong that we will already have a prototype of the SME crossover ESG framework, as I show a little bit with the map in the screen, the last page. And we are now engaging focus group and survey with the SME owners through organizations and professional bodies and industry trade organizations. And once we can verify this framework, we can try to get banks, maybe actually the Hong Kong MA in Hong Kong, if possible, that to engage to support the ESG framework for SME in Hong Kong and the Big Bay Area. This is a grand journey. It is not today, it's not tomorrow, but this is the steps that we're prepared to move forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lewis. I know also that you have other engagement to go to right after this session. And I'm told by my colleague that because of time limitation, we will not take any questions from online or from the audience at this moment. So perhaps if anyone here has any question for Professor Lewis, please feel free to write to Secretariat and we will convey your question to him. So thank you very much, Professor Lewis.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, have a great remaining sessions. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. So let me come to the next panelist, Mr. Gabriel Tang. He's a CEO of Guava Amenities in Singapore. Thank you very much for coming all this way and also for coming to the dry run yesterday and also has joined our task force meeting this morning. Mr. Gabriel Tang, I understand that Guava has emphasized the commitment to empowering the change of your clients. Can you share some stories or some figures on how your clients, even if small in scale, can get tangible benefits from going green?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tientip. So perhaps I can set some kind of context for the audience here. So Guava, we are in the business of providing guest amenities for global hospitality chains, airlines, and cruise liners. In the world that we live today, whereby there's growing uncertainties as well as the world also becomes more green conscious, we actually view ourselves as orchestrator of global resources, in the sense that by leveraging on our ecosystem of strategic partners around the world, we are able to help our clients to actually adapt to global challenges such as the waste crisis or even supply chain disruptions. And in doing so, we also help them to improve profitability by embracing sustainability at scale. And we demonstrate this through the work that we do with our customers. So take an example of one of the projects that we do for one of the integrated resort in Singapore. So we started working with them back in 2017, and back then client came to us to say that they are trying to adjust their market positioning in terms of their target audience to target a more premium segment of travelers. And they feel that whatever offering they had at that point in time did not really complement this offering that they are trying to put together to the customers. And what we did was that we actually worked together with a number of partners, manufacturers and supply chain providers to actually put in place solutions for them. And as a result of us working together with our various partners, we are able to put in place solutions that help them not only to achieve their objective of enhancing their guest experience, but at the same time, we also help them to reduce costs by 20%. We enable them to reduce waste by 12 tons. And the year after they implemented the solutions, they actually won a sustainability packaging in Singapore. So that actually shows that sustainability can be a win for all. And while there is a lot of things that is beyond our control, but what we can do is to ensure that ourselves, by becoming more sustainable and competitive, we are able to provide a strong incentive for our customers to embrace sustainability towards our purpose of creating scalable, sustainable impact together.
Thank you, Gabriel. Can you give maybe an example of how you did so? Would be very good.
So for example, just now the work that we did for our client, that was for an integrated resort in Singapore. What we did for them was, because they were trying to up the guest experience, right? And back then, the products that they used was using their logos put on every single item. But then we now know that if you were to use such products, the guest perceptions towards the offering being provided, it is what people will call as a house brand, and therefore the impression for the travelers is not as good. So what we did was that we actually worked together with a brand that we have identified that could complement the experience that the client wants to achieve. So we worked together with, we shortlisted a number of brands, and finally they picked one. And then we also shortlisted a couple of packaging solutions that will help them to actually reduce waste. So I think what we do is that by providing clients with options, we are able to help them achieve whatever objective that they are trying to do. But while at the same time, for example, what we did was just beyond what client had asked, was that the products that we use, we are able to convert some of them from plastics to biodegradable ones. And we did this without the client even asking. But because we believe that for every single project that we do for every single customer, it is an opportunity for us to showcase our capabilities and to demonstrate our willingness to support them in whatever initiative they have. So by doing so, client was pleasantly surprised, and they didn't expect, because at first they thought it would have been able, it would cost them more. But then because we put together the solution in such a way that is able to reduce waste, we actually help them to reduce costs. So it came as a surprise, and in the history of that particular client, that was the first time they awarded a few $1 million worth of gas amenities project without a tender, because whatever that we put forth at that point in time was so compelling, and there was no other solutions that could be compared to that we given to them.
Okay, thank you very much. And you seem to have many successful cases of these stories that you've helped clients achieve what they want. Are there actually any major hindrance that you have faced, and how did you overcome them?
So as per a number of speakers have mentioned, as also Professor Lewis mentioned about finance, right? So I think we all know that in business, all our clients are for profit. And therefore, to get the financial part of it right is very, very important. And in this case, for us, just now the example that I given, that was just for one integrated resort based in Singapore. But the bulk of our business are actually for global hotel chains that operates in multiple countries around the world. So you could imagine if they were to have, say, a sustainable solutions that they could roll out perhaps in the US or perhaps in countries like Singapore or Hong Kong, but they also have properties in other countries such as Indonesia, such as Malaysia, such as the Philippines, when affordability is a concern. And therefore, in our early years of engaging with clients, we found out very early on that it is not enough to have just sustainable solutions, but the solutions needs to be locally affordable for it to be globally scalable. And therefore, we make it a priority that when we deliver solutions for our customers, we make sure that it is sustainable, affordable, and scalable at the same time.
Thank you very much. So perhaps you will provide us some lessons later for here in Thailand to localize it here.
Yes. We do have a number of major groups in Thailand that are working with us. Oh, okay. Yes. So, I mean, it has been a great privilege to actually working with clients across multiple countries. And what we do is actually we learn from each other. I mean, it doesn't mean that we come to a client and say, oh, this is what we have and we know better than you. But it's more of understanding what they need. And more often than not, we may need to localize to the context of each individual country to make sure that whatever solutions that we put in place actually serve the local needs. Yes.
Thank you. That ends very well your stories of your companies. So then let me move on to our next panelist, Datuk William Nung, who is Chairman and of Central Region, the Small and Medium Enterprise Association in Malaysia. So Datuk William Nung, I have a very important question for Malaysia, that is, have the Paris Agreement become a significant driving force for SME to go green in Malaysia? Is that actually happening? And as we actually heard earlier in the discussion today, that government actually probably need to step up and play a role in companies to go green, whether big or small. So in that sense, has Malaysian government actually play any role in mobilizing, helping, supporting SME to, and also, or to shoulder some responsibility for emission reduction? Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Tiantip and ESCAP for the opportunity to voice out the views of the SMEs. As the Executive Secretary has mentioned earlier, 90% of all SMEs in the region, or rather 90% of all the businesses in the region are SMEs. In Malaysia, this number is 97.4%, making up 40% of our GDP. So needless to say, any discussion on the Green Deal for businesses won't work without significant and inclusive participation by the SMEs. You asked me the question whether the government is committed, whether subsequent to the Paris Agreement, what is being done in Malaysia. I think it is an open fact that Malaysia is committed to being carbon neutral by 2050, a very ambitious goal. Our stock market has recently announced a voluntary carbon market exchange, going to be compulsory, I think, a couple of times when this has proven to work. And I think we already more or less chosen Vera as our carbon trading partner. In fact, yesterday, we were in a budget dialogue with the Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Malaysia, and only this morning, the minister came out with a statement to say that we are going to form a national ESG framework to be announced by the end of this year, comprising of 4 areas. One, measurement. Secondly, the financing component of it. Thirdly, the capability and capacity of the businesses to adopt the framework. And of course, last but not least, the market mechanism to allow trading and so on. Nationally, we're looking at renewable energy making up 31% of our total capacity. At the heart of this, of course, is solar energy. It makes a lot of sense because Malaysia is just 1 degree north of the equator. And because of that, solar energy is seeing a massive boom across the country. So you have heard the government, every agency, every ministry is very focused in achieving our goal of being net zero by 2050. As an association, of course, we are deeply engaged with the government agencies to help our SMEs to reduce our footprint and eventually to be net zero. But as you can imagine, this is a lot easier said than done. For example, 2 years ago, we were liaising with our Environment Ministry, and there was a goal to actually enforce the full elimination of single-use plastic in every sector by 2023. We are given 2 years to go from heavy usage to zero usage. So we had no choice. As much as the industry say, look, we are definitely going towards that direction, we're simply not prepared. We were in the thick of a pandemic. There are a lot of issues to look into. It's not as simple as just finding an alternative and switching it from plastic to something else and off you go. There's a lot of consideration. And because of that, we fought back and we said, look, we need to timeline this. And now I think the timeline has now been extended to 2030 and sectoral, and it will be phased out on a sectoral basis. So these are some of the challenges that we've continued to face as SMEs in trying to adopt some of these ESG standards. But of course, this does not mean that our SMEs are not interested in a low-carbon economy. I think far from it. The current driver, of course, as we all know, is the demand side. Okay, if you ask the SMEs, are you committed to ESG? Some would say yes, some would say no. But at the end of the day, dollar and cents count, as previous speakers has mentioned. So it's very much demand-driven by customers, by industries, by the market. And now that we have just ratified in Malaysia the ESCAP, and of course, soon, hopefully by October, before the next election, the CPTPP, I think this will, of course, open up more markets for us and along with it, higher burden and standard for emission reduction. So in short, I need to say SMEs are no choice, it's not even a choice at all, have to go green. But the challenge, therefore, is threefold. And the first one is obviously the know-how, including reporting and measurement. And I take an example, and that is my own company. I'm from Malaysia. We're a Malaysian company. We're listed in a catalyst exchange in Singapore. And a year ago, when we were listed, we were told, look, you do your financial report, your annual report, and your sustainable reporting can come in a year later. So you're given 18 months of a lead time to basically get used to it. It's a honeymoon period, so to speak, before we do our sustainable reporting. But of course, in this chase to be the first, suddenly we got this guideline from Singapore Stock Exchange to say, look, we are now shortening the timeline. You absolutely have to deliver your sustainable reporting this year. So we're essentially given 3 months to go from not having any technical knowledge, not having any information about how to do it, to having to come out with a report. And we have to bear in mind that even though there are companies that are listed in Catalyst, for example, in Singapore and in Malaysia, we have the lead market and the ACE market, essentially all these companies are still SMEs. You cannot apply the same standard that you do for a company like ours. That is, today we are about 40 million in market capitalization versus, say, DBS Bank, that is 2,000 times bigger than us in terms of market cap. Same standards. Their sustainability department probably has more people than our entire company combined. So again, I think these are some of the challenges. The know-how. How do we bridge that gap? How do we prepare our SMEs so that we are ready, not just to adopt ESG, but the reporting of it, the measuring of it, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing. The second challenge, of course, is the technology behind it. And I think earlier speakers have spoken about how ESG is both a challenge as well as an opportunity for SMEs. And I think this is where SMEs can really take advantage of, as Gabriel has spoken earlier, how his company has taken advantage, but providing the solution and innovation because of ESG, because of the sustainability drive, because of the Green Deal, and that helps the business. So tech is both a challenge as well as opportunity where ESG is concerned. Of course, last but not least, as many has spoken before, financing, a huge gap there. We have just gotten out of the pandemic, 2 long years of lockdown in the case of Malaysia. And looking at the hall today, everybody's masked. So I think the pandemic is still very much around us. And we are now asked to say, look, you have 2 years, a year and a half, 3 years, whatever timeline that we have in different economies to transition from where we are to one where you are either low emitting or you're net zero. Huge task. Where do you find the funding to do that? So we're not just talking about using alternative materials, using alternative supplies. We are talking about replacing plants, equipment that could be 15, 20 years old, right? Where do you find the funding? And even if the funding for that, how do you pay the interest? How does it make commercial sense? You want to say, look, the whole market has changed, the demand is there. Again, how does that make commercial sense in the short run? So a lot of intervention by the government is absolutely required in partnership, of course, with financial institutions to enable some form of low cost or core payment of this transition. I think that is absolutely essential. I think that would be all I want to say. I pass it back to you, Ms. Moderator.
Okay, thank you very much. That's such an illustrative story, and I can actually feel, how SME would have felt, right, being required to report on the sustainability reporting. So in that case, William, what does the government of Malaysia has done in terms of providing support, apart from providing, understand the low-cost loan? Are they providing any tax incentives, and are these requirement mandatory? Absolutely has to be implemented.
I think that is what we are trying to engage and to fight for in the upcoming budget. The budget has been brought forward by 3 weeks this year. So our timeline to actually present a proposal to the government has now also been shortened to actually next week, so that the budget can be read in early October. So we are pushing for 2 things. One, of course, incentives for businesses to actually adopt changes. Secondly, of course, deduction on capital expenditure. So the issue here is really, in my mind, about investing into the tech, investing into the changes, and that would involve a lot of capital expenditure. In our country, and I believe in most countries, capital expenditure, of course, is not tax deductible. So we're asking intervention, in a sense, a financial intervention from the government to allow us to put in more money into the transition.
Thank you. And the government doesn't have much money either at the moment. Yeah, so private sector is asking, the government to support, and also I feel the government, not just in Malaysia, right, in this region.
So I just feel that we are in a trap. We can see where we are getting at. I mean, COP26 just ended, and of course, there was the strongest of statement to say that, look, we are in a climate emergency. So the word here is emergency. So we see that. We say that there's no two way about it. We absolutely have to go towards that target. But how do we then help the SMEs who are caught in between, right? Without the right knowledge, without the right technology, without the right financing resources to actually scale or to rather transition to what we want them to be. So I think that requires a very separate discussion, a lengthy discussion, right?
Thank you very much. I agree. So in that case, let me continue with our another panelist, distinguished panelist, Mr. Kelvin Teo. He's a Group CEO of Funding Societies. Mr. Kelvin, we have heard a lot of microfinancing stories in remote areas. Can you please share with us how you come up with the idea of harnessing fintech innovation to empower SME in urban areas? Actually, perhaps also start with explaining a little bit of context about what you're doing, and then maybe then the audience can understand as well. Thank you.
Sure. So Funding Societies is the largest SME fintech lender in Southeast Asia. So we're currently licensed and operating in 5 countries: Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, as well as Thailand. 5 key countries in Southeast Asia, really complementing banks in giving short-term unsecured financing to the small, medium businesses. So it's literally replacing, say, informal sources of funding or personal credit cards as a way to fund and grow the businesses. And that's why I think within the last 8 years, we've actually scaled quite rapidly to serve 100,000 plus SMEs, and we're giving out more than $1 billion of loans every single year. So we're very fortunate to be backed by SoftBank Vision Fund, the Economic Development Board of Singapore, the Investment Fund, as well as SMBC Bank in really scaling up our endeavors in this region. And to us, we see that financing is really the crux of the whole of solving this whole Green Deal. Because if you look at small, medium businesses, the biggest pain point they have is really financing. And if you can't even solve today's meal or sustainability or necessity of surviving, how can anyone of them think about, hey, how can we save the world tomorrow? And just now when Professor Lewis mentioned that, hey, the key solution is money and giving money to SMEs, I think I saw some smiles around. It seems like it makes natural sense. But when you look at actual conversations that happened, you'll notice that, hey, when government even prioritize money to support SMEs in a transition, the conversation is always that, hey, should the money go to the banks or the big companies because they can reach more SMEs, because they are serving a bigger scale, because they have better governance, rather than necessarily SMEs that actually need help to do that? So when we say that giving money to SMEs, that conversation actually is not politically that straightforward, frankly. And that when we talk about how we support SMEs to make this transition in terms of financing, we always say that, okay, fine, green it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. Green can help your business to grow. Green can be profitable as well. And therefore, you see green funds coming in and saying that, hey, I want to do green financing, but my expected margins is the same. I want you to do more reporting for me to prove that this is green, but the interest rates will remain the same. So you'll find that there is a bit of conflict in terms of, hey, some of the impact funds even saying that, hey, I want to push green financing to support SMEs, but I'm not going to lift a finger to help you on this front. And that actually creates a huge dichotomy, right? Because if SMEs are already facing challenges getting financing from traditional financial institutions, adding on an additional layer of greenness of it is not going to help more SMEs to get financing from the banks. And frankly, that's why we have came into the picture to really solve this short-term financing gap for the SMEs. And one quick example is really, say, in Indonesia. We were looking to help in terms of green financing for agriculture. So how can we help farmers to do more sustainable farming in areas that you should be farming, rather than rather than encouraging deforestation and drive unsustainable farming. So we were partnering with other technology companies to monitor through satellite imaging, through geographical technology, to figure out, hey, where, if the plantation or the farmers are farming at these certain areas, we will provide them financing to support and grow their business. And through data science, help them to actually optimize their plantation so that they can make more money and be more sustainable. And the challenge that we face is that, hey, to make this financing to these farmers sustainable, I need a much lower cost of fund, and that which I can't secure from local banks. And frankly, we could not secure from European funds as well. And therefore, despite having the technology for reporting, for monitoring, we actually, frankly, could not proceed beyond supporting a few corn farmers because it's more short-term financing by nature. So that was a key challenge that, frankly, we faced. But one thing that we're really grateful and excited is that we are starting to see a change in tide. That recently, after going through COVID-19 and building a track record of 7 to 8 years, we are finally getting support from commercial banks like HSBC. They've just given us a $50 million loan so that through us, we can actually disperse more financing to the SMEs. And increasingly, we are seeing European or even impact funds saying that, hey, yes, we want you to go green, and we are actually willing to offer a lower interest rates to you if you can implement this reporting and show that these farmers or these SMEs that you are serving are actually going green and driving sustainability. And also because of that, in recent times, we as a fintech company has also adopted IFC's exclusion list to make sure that we are actually supporting SMEs that are driving sustainability. And we are very fortunate that by working with Asian Development Bank in the analysis of our impact in the last 2 years on an annual basis, the SMEs that we served and lend to has contributed to $3.6 billion in GDP or 350,000 jobs employments during a COVID period. So we see that, frankly, financing is really the crux and center of change. Frankly, there is a lot of inconsistency between what perhaps governments or even institutions want to do versus what they're actually doing. But we are really grateful that we are starting to see a group of commercial as well as commercial institutions as well as funds starting to make the first step to support fintech players like ourselves to further accelerate this change towards green financing. And that is supporting not just for rural SMEs, but also urban SMEs who are frankly facing the equal challenge of financing towards making this transition. So we are really excited about this conference and of course the B21 in Bali that's upcoming to really accelerate this conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. That is seems to be a very exciting story coming from your company. So can you tell me a bit about the secret formula of this fintech company in helping SME, in extending maybe lower interest rate loan to them? Are you actually helping them with their business proposal, like using innovation, technology to see where should the business be, where should farmers growing plantation? Is that
I think
how it works?
Frankly, it's really a combination of both commitment, experiment, as well as just a combination of financial and technology together. So I think first and foremost, when it comes to commitment, I think why we call ourselves funding societies is because we are really focused in terms of helping our SMEs. The reality is that I think many of you will know consumer financing is way more lucrative. But we have been very laser sharp in that, hey, we are here to serve the society and therefore SMEs are our key focus. And that's something that we have sustained and committed ourselves to for the last 7-8 years, even through sectorial financial crisis as well as, of course, COVID-19 and recently a potential upcoming recession. So it's really conviction for within the team. But I think that also is a combination of leveraging on the appropriate financial and technology. I think a lot of people would think has this mythical, romantic view that because you have technology, you don't need any documentations. You magically will know the risk of the company, so on and so forth. But the reality is that in countries like Southeast Asia, frankly, the whole offline to online, the whole manual to digital transition takes time. So I think that we have taken a very balanced view of, hey, these are the areas that banks have done well, I'm going to copy it. These are the areas that tech companies are doing well, I'm going to copy it as well, and then come out with and solve and offer financing from a first principles perspective. So a key part of us in terms of offering financing or credit to SMEs is really by leveraging on the cash flow of their small, medium businesses. So while banks focus on giving out loans to SMEs that have capital, that have collateral, so really the SMEs may or may not be around for the next 3 years, but as long as I have collateral, I'll be fine with the loan. For us, we really focus on cash flow and how we structure the loan so that as long as the SMEs have the cash flow in the next few months or year, I will be able to provide financing. And that's also because data is allowing me to predict what will happen in the next 3 to 6 months or maybe 9 months. Frankly, we are not able to predict more than 12 months. And therefore, we focus on balancing that, hey, this is what I can control using technology. This is the financial principles of risk management, and really blending both of them allows us to actually build a sustainable business that has also attracted capital from financial institutions like HSBC, who really audited our books to show that, hey, our credit track record is indeed stellar. The last part of it is really experimentation. That I think when it comes to financial inclusion or even credit, there's always a chicken and egg issue that if the data is not proven to be useful, why should I collect it? But if I don't collect it and give some loans based on that, how do I know that it's going to be useful? And that's an area whereby we have decided to make an investment into it that, hey, there are some areas of data that may or may not work out, but we have constantly invest resources to test out to see what data works and what data doesn't work, and constantly create new knowledge or credit knowledge and insights that's enabled us to serve SMEs both locally as well as regionally in a much more effective way. And I think that is why we see ourselves highly complementary with banks, because we really specialize in small, short, unsecured financing. Frankly, at the interest rates that are higher than banks because we don't take deposits. But we see that, and this complements banks who are really good in terms of big, long, secured loans. The banks will typically give loans more than $1 million, 3 to 5 years, secured by collateral, but pretty competitive interest rates within the teens or even single digit. So for us, giving small, short, unsecured financing, it really helps us to complement with banks. And I really think that if we can work closer with banks in terms of serving SMEs, we can really expand the pie together and build a stronger economic base and SME base in Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think we can actually continue this conversation for a very long time because it's also very interesting. But I'm conscious of time, and we have also a last but not least panelist, Dr. Michael Schapper. He's a board member of Small Business Development Corporation of Western Australia, and also an adjunct professor. He will be here with us online. So Michael, I hope you're already there.
I'm here.
Yes, okay. So Michael, thank you very much for coming even online. Hope to see you in person next time. I've also heard that you've recently headed up a study looking at SME and climate change across Southeast Asia, which were actually all our panelists here today. So what issues did you actually examine? What did you find? And how can that help us prepare for the future? Maybe our Green Deal implementation. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll keep them short again in the interest of time. But look, we did have an examination of SMEs across broadly the ASEAN region. We looked at 8 of the member countries across the region. And there are some significant differences between small firms and large firms. And there's also some quite distinguishable trends. In terms of dealing with climate change directly, some very clear trends are very evident. The first one is that businesses are, in terms of reducing their emissions, especially the small and micro-sized end, are very much focused on the simple, practical and easy to achieve tasks. So if you ask them to embark on accreditation, wholesale restructuring or reconfiguration of operations, they're very unlikely to do it. On the other hand, recycle, reduce, reuse, installing LED lights, very simple practical measures are the ones that frequently are the things that small businesses turn to. So that's the very first thing. If it's simple to do, they will do it. If it's complex, they're unlikely to do it. We also looked at how they were planning and preparing for the reality of climate change, not just reducing emissions, but also the fact that climate change is already upon us, and how are they dealing with that. In Southeast Asia, one of the most common outcomes already is the prevalence of extreme weather events, whether they be greater rainfall in some parts of the region, lesser rainfall in others, typhoons and storms across much of the region. And again, what we found was that unfortunately most businesses were not taking a preparatory approach, but were rather reacting. If and when they experienced an extreme weather event, then they would react to it. They might move premises if it was an extreme case. Certainly they would usually look at things like their insurance needs going forward. But it was really preventative in advance. So they're the two very clear trends that come straight out. First of all, businesses are willing to reduce emissions if it's easy and straightforward to do it. Secondly, they are finding it difficult to deal already with climate change in practice. Some of the other parts that become very evident relate to some of the comments other members of the panel have already made. The 3 biggest barriers to dealing more effectively with climate change are lack of money, lack of people, and lack of knowledge about a topic. So in many cases, the measures that are required to reduce emissions require an outlay, and even if it's got a small payback period, many firms, because many small businesses operate on very thin margins, find that it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Most of them will happily admit that they don't have the in-house capacity in terms of their own staff, and they also are looking for the information about how to make those changes. And they want that information in a really digestible, practical form. They don't want generalised statements. They want, this is what you need to do in your business directly. So there's some very clear things to take away. We also looked, incidentally, at what sources of advice were trusted most substantially. Government agencies, business chambers, friends and families were the most relied sources. And I think this also holds some indication about where we go to in terms of working with SMEs to help reduce their emissions and prepare for the future. One of the things that is really evident, though, and it needs, I think, to be borne in mind as a closing comment before I throw back to you, is that a small business is not a big business shrunken down. There are some 71 million small businesses in Southeast Asia alone. Indonesia is the standout case. It has approximately 65 million SMEs by its own count. And well over 80% of those are micro businesses. And much of the next 15 to 18% are small sized. So we're only actually dealing with a very small number of businesses that have any size beyond 50, 20 or so employees. Most businesses in the region have less than 10 staff. And in fact, the most common business entity really has only the owner operator. So we are really we're not dealing with a large corporation shrunk down in size with all the apparatus, skills, knowledge, finance, expert advice, and sophistication of a large firm. We are dealing with very, very small businesses. And if you think that those micro businesses don't count, well, our work at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies over the last year showed that the emissions output for those micro businesses across the region is greater than the sum total of emissions emitted by countries such as Cambodia. So SMEs across the region really do make a difference, those 68, 69 million, and most of them are micro businesses. And the final one, which we haven't really touched on today, but it is a policy challenge we are going to need to deal with, is that informal businesses are the missing link here. Small businesses are not well understood, but we know we have less understanding. We don't even know how many informal businesses are out there. By definition, informal businesses sit outside the official council businesses. They're not part of the regulatory framework. Conversely, they're also not easily accessible to business support and financial aid, assistance, advice, or any other help that we might try to give them as well. And we do know that those numbers are very large. We just don't know how large. But I can bet my bottom dollar that there's an awful lot of dirty industries operating in the informal sector, as well as quite clean service sector ones as well. So we have actually substantial challenges ahead of us in bringing small businesses into the framework. On a positive note, just to conclude off, we do know that small business owners are strongly driven by their own personal values. And interestingly enough, one of the throw-ups of our work has been to show that the personal values, most small business owners, who are in turn the owner-managers usually of their business, because most of them operate the business that they own, they're not absentee landlords, most of them actually have highly green credentials in the sense that most of them record very high levels of concern about ESG issues. So we've got a real strong positive there. The challenge is to help make the transition for them easy and not to assume that they are big businesses with all the apparatus that they have, but rather have to be treated somewhat differently as well. So there's some opening comments, and I'll leave it back to you to throw open.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I think we actually have to come to the end of this session, although, I wish we have more time, and it has been a very fruitful session. We have a mix of practitioners, companies, and researchers. I hope that the audience here, both on-site and online, get some information and can continue this substantive discussion on how to include this important portion of the society and of the companies into making the society greener, having greener operations, and towards a Green Deal for business. Thank you very much, and over to you, Benjamin.
Okay, can I have a round of applause for our panellists, please? Thank you very much, Dr. Subhania, for handling these discussions on ESG for small business. We all look forward to learning about future developments in this fast-changing areas. So, we are very nearly at the end of our program for today, and thank you everyone for the attention that they've been paying to all of our speakers. Our last session will be the closing session, and once more, I will hand the floor to Dr. George Lamb, Chair of the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network. Thank you, Dr. George.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience and really making time and stay put until now. I mean, we exceeded the time allocated. My apologies. But I think, the interest was so intense, so I decided not to do any intervention at all. Now, after this, if you remain around, we can take a group photo as well, just for memories after this successful session. Now, I'd like to thank the organizing committee again and the secretariat team for great efforts. We had a great set of speeches, inaugural speech, and also special speech. The two addresses, from the Minister of Finance and also the Deputy Governor of Bangkok were outstanding and inspiring, as I heard from many attendees today. And then we had three powerful roundtables, addressing green transformation and taking specific actions, as well as ESG and SMEs issues. And as you can see, the challenges remain tremendous. How to make sure SMEs are not left behind, and also how to make sure the business environment, the community are ESG friendly, green transformation friendly, green finance friendly and supportive. The list is long. It requires the private sector taking the lead and working together, not alone. So we need to unite and mobilize the private sector. And a solution is the Asia-Pacific Green Deal for Business. Let's, get our act together. I appeal for your support to recruit corporate champions, SME champions, to come to join forces with us. And this afternoon, we already talked about how to actually get the Green Deal implemented. We talk about advancing a zero-carbon, affordable, and resilient energy system, building smart, low-carbon, water-secure, and climate-resilient cities, infrastructure and mobility, mobilizing public and private finance for green transformation, accelerating and scaling up innovations for sustainable development, and finally, changing towards a more circular economy. So, taking specific actions is the key. Working together as a team, and together we can build back better together. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Secretariat team, if we may somehow, get a photo here so that we can give to participants as a souvenir for years to come. May later, when we celebrate the 10th year of implementation of the Green Deal, we can compare notes on who actually spent time here together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you once again, Dr. Lamb. And as always, thanks for your expertise as chairperson. Thank you, everyone. We've had a good discussion here today on the green transformation. And I encourage everyone, of course, to, in detail, check out the Green Deal Declaration and please sign up to commit to a more sustainable future. So once more, I ask everyone, we'll be in touch with you by email to please fill out the questionnaire for our event to give us some feedback on what you think. I will see you all, I hope, at APBF 2023 next year. Here on the screen is the QR code for our questionnaire. And with this, I would like to bring the session to a close. Thank you, everyone. Please, come up for a photo.
ถ่ายรูปก่อน
Yes, please, everyone, do come to the front for the photo. Okay, thank you, everyone.